I grew up in Wichita Falls, and if you've ever driven down River Road, you've probably seen it. The house sits crooked on a patch of land where the grass grows higher than it should, and the trees lean in toward the roof like they're ashamed to be seen near it. Nobody lives there, hasn't for decades, but everyone in town knows about the house on River Road. Kids used to dare each other to run up the porch steps and touch the front door, though most of them only made it halfway across the yard before turning back. It isn't just the way the boards groan or the smell of mold that leaks out when the wind shifts. It's something heavier, like the house knows you're there and is deciding whether or not to let you leave. The story starts with the Crawfords. That's what folks around here say, at least. They moved in sometime after the war. Husband, wife, and their 2 little girls. He was a mechanic, worked down at the garage on Scott Street, and she stayed home. For a while, it seemed like any other family. But the house started to show its teeth early. Neighbors heard the girls screaming at night. Sharp, panicked screams that would cut off just as suddenly as they began. When someone knocked on the door the next morning, Mrs. Crawford would smile politely and say the girls just had bad dreams, nothing to worry about. But those same neighbors swore they saw bruises on the children's arms, little fingerprints where no one should have been grabbing them. By the time the Crawfords packed up and left, people whispered that the house had taken something from them. They moved in as a family of 4, but only 3 left. The youngest girl, Margaret, vanished one night in June. The sheriff organized searches, the river was dragged, neighbors were questioned. Nothing. They never found her. The official story was that she must have wandered off and drowned, but the Crawfords knew better. Mrs. Crawford said once to the woman next door that she could still hear Margaret crying in the walls at night. The family left town after that, and no one ever saw them again. The house sat empty for a while, then new people came, as they always do. Wichita Falls was growing, and property was cheap. A family named Hardwick bought it in the early 60s, fixed it up, painted over the peeling wallpaper. They lasted less than a year. Mr. Hardwick was found one morning at the bottom of the stairs, his neck broken. Folks said he fell in the dark, but his wife told a different story when she packed her things. She told the grocer downtown that she woke up at 3 a.m. and saw pale hands reaching out of the wallpaper in the hallway, shoving her husband as he passed. She said she would never set foot in that house again, and she didn't. I was 17 the first time I went inside. It was the summer of '88, and me and a couple of friends had been drinking warm beer by the river. One of the guys dared me to go up and look through the house, and stupid as I was, I agreed. The door wasn't locked. I remember the smell hitting me first. Thick and sour, like damp wood and something rotten just beneath it. The wallpaper was still up in most of the rooms, yellow and curling at the edges, and that's when I saw them. The handprints. Not painted, not drawn, pressed. The wallpaper bulged outward, as if someone inside the wall had pushed with their palms flat. Small hands, children's hands, and some larger ones too, spread in patterns across the hallways. I ran my own hand over one, and I swear to God I felt warmth like the wall itself was breathing. We didn't stay long. The floor creaked with every step, and in the kitchen there was a sound, faint but clear, like fingernails dragging across plaster. My friend Mark heard it too, and he swore he saw something move behind the wallpaper, a ripple that shifted from one end of the room to the other. We ran out, laughing at first to cover our nerves, but by the time we hit the road, none of us were laughing anymore. Mark got sick that night, vomiting until his throat bled, and he wouldn't talk about the house again. 2 years later, he put a shotgun in his mouth. His mother told mine that in the weeks before he died, he said Margaret's name in his sleep over and over again, even though he never should have known it. The place has only gotten worse since then. The roof sagged in the 90s, the windows shattered, weeds climbing through the floorboards, but the handprints are still there. People say new ones keep appearing, fresh and distinct even though no one lives there. Hunters passing by have heard crying at night, thin and hollow, echoing through the walls. A couple of ghost hunters from Dallas set up cameras in the front room 5 years back, but their tapes came back ruined, nothing but static and muffled voices whispering underneath. They left town in a hurry, wouldn't even stop for food on the way out. Last spring, a drifter tried staying there. People saw him around the convenience store, asking if the house was really empty, saying he needed a roof for a few nights. He went in with a backpack and a lantern. That was the last time anyone saw him. The sheriff found the lantern in the kitchen, still burning, though the fuel should have run out days before. The backpack was there too, but no sign of the man. Just more handprints in the wallpaper, bigger than before, stretching higher up toward the ceiling as if whoever was inside had grown taller. Now nobody goes near it. Not at night, not in the day. The city won't tear it down either. They sent a crew once, but the men refused after the first hour. Said the foundation was too unstable, but one of them, a guy I knew from high school, told me different. He said when they swung the first hammer into the wall, the sound that came out wasn't wood breaking. It was a scream, loud enough that all of them dropped their tools and ran. I drive by sometimes, though I don't know why. Maybe it's curiosity, maybe it's something darker, a pull I can't explain. The house still stands there on River Road, sagging and silent but not empty. The wallpaper flaps in the breeze through broken windows, and when the sun hits it just right, you can see them. The handprints, dozens of them, pressed out from inside. Some are small, some large, some smeared downward like whoever made them was being dragged deeper. And if you're unlucky enough to stop and listen, you might hear it too. The faint, steady sound of fingernails scratching, waiting for the wallpaper to peel back again. Because whatever lives in the walls of that house, it isn't done yet. It's hungry, it's patient, and it remembers every single person who ever set foot inside. In Lufkin, there's a stretch of farmland people don't talk about unless they're already 2 drinks in, and the night's gone quiet enough for confessions. The place doesn't look much different from any other piece of East Texas land, with its rolling fields, barbed wire fences, and the soft line of pine trees rising against the horizon. But sitting dead center is a barn that no one uses anymore. The woods blacken with age, the roof sags, and every night the same thing happens without fail. By morning, the doors are streaked with red paint, letters dripping as though they'd been clawed onto the surface. Let us out. No one ever sees who does it. No one ever hears footsteps or catches a truck driving out there. But by sunrise, the words are there, bold and wet, like the barn itself was bleeding. When I was young, my uncle told me never to go near the hollow place, as he called it. He said it like the land itself had been scooped out of the earth's stomach, and what filled it back in wasn't right. He used to spit whenever he drove past it, a sharp sound against the window of his pickup, like the very sight of that barn left something sour on his tongue. But I didn't listen. Kids rarely do. My first mistake was letting my curiosity build until it turned into something like hunger. The second was following that hunger down an old dirt road that smelled of pine sap and damp earth until I saw it for myself. The first time I laid eyes on the barn, I thought it was nothing special, just a tired old thing that looked ready to collapse. But then I saw the streaks. Thick red lines smeared across the doors, crooked letters running together. Let us out. The paint was still wet, fresh enough that it gleamed in the afternoon sun. I remember touching it, thinking it had to be some kind of prank. It wasn't paint. The texture was wrong. Sticky, almost warm, like something that hadn't come from a can but from a body. I told myself it was just rust or old varnish, anything but what I suspected, and I left. But the smell stuck with me. Metallic, heavy, like the inside of a butcher shop. It wasn't long before the barn became an obsession. People in Lufkin avoided the subject, but I pressed them anyway. The older folks shut me down fast, but now and then you'd catch someone who'd let slip more than they meant to. My neighbor swore his cousin went missing after sneaking out there one night with a girl. The girl came back screaming and clawing at her own face, but she wouldn't talk. Another man said the land had once belonged to a family that kept to themselves, a mother, father, and 2 boys. One summer night in the 1940s, the family just vanished. No trace, no bodies. The sheriff back then closed the case and warned folks to leave it be. After that, the barn was left to rot, except, of course, for the words that appeared every night. When I was 19, full of beer and bravado, I went out there again, this time with friends. We parked the truck a good distance away, killed the headlights, and walked the rest of the way with flashlights. The air was thick, humid, and the crickets were louder than usual, as if the whole night was vibrating. When we reached the barn, the words were already there. Let us out, big and dripping. One of my buddies laughed nervously and said it was just some local kids messing around. He dared me to open the doors. The others joined in, their voices cracking in that false courage way. I don't know why I did it, maybe to shut them up, or maybe because I couldn't stand the thought of turning back again. I grabbed the iron latch. It was cold. Colder than it had any right to be on a muggy Texas night. The second I touched it, the air around us dropped. Every cricket stopped. The world went silent. When I pulled the doors open, the smell hit us first. It was a blast of rot, heavy and wet, like a slaughterhouse floor after weeks of neglect. My flashlight shook in my hand as the beam cut into the dark, The inside of the barn was wrong. It wasn't empty like you'd expect. The floor wasn't hay and dirt, but something black and shifting, like shadows that moved even when our lights hit them. And the walls, God, the walls were crawling. Shapes pressed outward like dozens of people were inside them, pushing to break free. You could see faces warped and screaming, stretching the wood. A hand slid out for a moment, fingers pale and dripping red before it sank back into the wall again. We didn't last long. One of my friends dropped his light and bolted. Another started to scream, a thin, high sound that didn't stop even as we dragged him away. I remember running, lungs burning until we hit the truck and peeled out of there. Gravel spitting under the tires. The screaming one didn't stop for hours. His parents sent him to a hospital out in Houston and he never came back. As for me, I couldn't sleep for weeks. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those faces pushing through the wood, their mouths moving silently, their eyes begging. Years have passed since then, but the barn is still there. People say if you drive past it at night, you'll see the red letters glowing faint in the moonlight even before they appear. Others claim they've heard voices calling out, muffled like someone screaming from deep underwater. A few brave souls have gone out there with cameras, but none of the footage ever comes back right. Static, glitches, colors bleeding into each other, and sometimes the people don't come back at all. I don't go near it anymore. Not because I'm afraid of dying, but because I'm afraid of what's inside. Afraid that if I look too long or listen too closely, I'll understand what they're saying. And maybe then I won't be able to resist opening the doors again. Some nights I lie awake and hear whispers at my window. Soft and urgent. Words I can't quite make out. When I check the glass in the morning, there are streaks on it. Red streaks, the same crooked letters as always. Let us out. When you drive through Crockett, Texas, the land opens wide with pine woods and worn-out ranches, and every town corner has a story too heavy for the air to carry. Among the locals, there's one house they don't even point at anymore, though it stands there stubborn, sagging under its own weight as if ashamed to still be upright. They call it the schoolteacher's house, though the last schoolteacher to live there died before Eisenhower finished his first term. The place has been empty since 1954, and yet the walls inside are streaked with chalk marks, slanted letters, misspelled words, childish games scrawled in little hands that never seem to fade. The older folks whisper about it in grocery lines or over coffee at the diner, but they lower their voices when they do, because speaking of it feels like inviting something too close. I made the mistake of not believing them. I wanted to see it for myself. The first time I walked up to it, it was late summer, air thick and suffocating. The white paint had peeled off in strips, leaving gray wood bones exposed to the weather. Every window was broken or boarded, and a nest of vines had swallowed most of the porch rails. When I pushed open the gate, it creaked loud enough to wake the dead. The yard smelled of dirt and something faintly sour, like rain that had soaked through old fabric and never dried. A wind blew just enough to stir the tall grass, and it carried with it the faintest trace of chalk dust, the kind that lingers on your hands long after you've erased a blackboard. Inside, the air was cool in a way that didn't match the August heat. The boards groaned under my weight, but the room stood as if they'd been left waiting for me. The wallpaper was torn, colors muted to yellow and brown, but on every wall there were words. Words written by small hands, crooked sentences, shaky alphabets. I saw names, little prayers, numbers scrawled and circled, games of hangman half finished. The marks weren't faded like old chalk should have been. They were fresh, dust flaking when I brushed one with my finger. My heart beat harder, but I told myself it was vandals, kids sneaking in for kicks. Still, there was something strange in how the writing layered on itself. Decades of scribbles overlapping until the walls looked alive with voices pressed against them. I kept walking deeper. In the kitchen, a line of tiny footprints ran across the floor, white as if someone had stepped barefoot in chalk and padded into the room. They trailed to the corner, then vanished against the cabinet door. I bent to look closer and swore I could hear scratching inside the wood, faint but insistent, like fingernails dragging across the back of the cupboard. I didn't open it. I couldn't. My throat tightened and a cold sweat ran down my spine. The stairs to the second floor sagged like they hadn't been touched in years, but halfway up I saw something that stopped me. Written across the risers in perfect uneven lines were multiplication tables. 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 4 is 16. The numbers continued all the way up, each stair its own lesson. My mouth went dry because the handwriting was the same on each step, The same pressure, the same childish curves, like the same little hand had been writing for 70 years without growing older. By the time I reached the top, I heard what I swore was a school bell, faint and hollow, as though rung from far away. The upstairs hall smelled of dust and mildew, but beneath it was something sharper, something that reminded me of old pencils, of a classroom too long sealed. The first door opened into a room that must have belonged to the teacher. A bed frame without a mattress sat against the wall, and a dresser leaned crooked, its mirror shattered. But the walls, it was the walls again. Lessons written in chalk over and over, as if 1,000 invisible hands had been forced to repeat them forever. I will not speak out of turn. I will not disobey. I will not leave. The last line was written so many times it covered the plaster, every inch from floor to ceiling, the letters pressing into each other like a desperate chant. I backed out, heart pounding, and opened the next door. That room was worse. Desks. Small, rusted metal desks, the kind from the 1950s, lined up in rows as if waiting for children to sit again, and on each one lay a piece of chalk untouched, sharp as the day it was made. I felt my breath catch. The chalk on the desk closest to me rolled slowly across the surface, as though nudged by a small invisible hand. It hit the floor and cracked in half. The sound echoed too loud for such a small break, bouncing off the walls like laughter. That's when I heard it, the giggling. High-pitched, light, the kind of laughter that should have been harmless if not for the fact that it came from every direction at once. The desks rattled, chalk dust rose in the air, and the giggles built into a chorus until it was all I could hear. My legs moved before I thought. I ran, down the hall, down the stairs, out the door, the sound chasing me like a pack of children at recess. But when I hit the yard, silence dropped heavy. I turned once, breath ragged, and through the broken window of the upstairs classroom I saw them. Dozens of faint little faces, pale and hollow-eyed, pressed to the glass watching me. And scrawled on the inside of the pane in bright white chalk was my name. I don't go near Crockett anymore. Folks who live there say the house stands the same. Chalk still bright, children's words growing thicker on the walls with each year. Nobody sees who writes them. Nobody goes inside. But every so often someone swears they hear the faint ringing of a school bell carried through the pines. Long after dark, when no school should be in session. And the laughter that follows makes them walk a little faster, eyes down, pretending they didn't hear it all. Highway 59 is long and lonely, and if you've driven through Nacogdoches at night, you know the stretch I'm talking about. Pines crowd close on both sides, their branches hanging heavy like eavesdroppers, and the dark feels thicker there than anywhere else in East Texas. People say that road swallows things whole. Cars that vanish, hitchhikers that aren't really there, and one particular cabin that waits like a spider in the woods for the curious or the careless. Folks around town don't call it a cabin, though. They call it the shack, like it's some living thing that doesn't deserve more dignity than that. I first heard about it from a trucker who came into the diner where I used to work the night shift. He was trembling when he told me. A big man with grease under his nails and a gut that said he wasn't easily scared. He swore he'd pulled over because his rig was overheating. Said he spotted the shack just off the tree line. A little one-room place with a tin roof and a lantern glow inside. Like someone had been waiting for him. He never went in, he said, but he walked close enough to hear a voice whisper his name. He swore he hadn't told anyone in town his name. He got back in his truck and drove until the engine caught fire on the road, but he didn't care. He never wanted to see that shack again. That story stuck with me. I knew the road well, and sure enough, a few weeks later I found myself slowing down near the mile marker folks whispered about. I was young, reckless, and too dumb to let good sense keep my foot on the gas. It was late, just after midnight, fog rolling in thick from the Angelina River bottoms. My headlights caught the outline of something square and squat in the trees. Exactly where the trucker said it would be. The shack was real. The thing about it, though, was that it looked both new and ancient at the same time. The wood was raw, like it had just been cut, but the nails were rusted and bent. The roof sagged, though the tin had no rust. And the lantern light flickered steady in the window, not like a flame, but like something pretending to be one. I pulled over onto the gravel shoulder. My heart was pounding hard enough that I could feel it in my throat. But I got out anyway, like something was drawing me closer. The air smelled wrong. Not just damp earth or pine. It smelled like hot copper, sharp and metallic the way blood does when it's fresh. The trees were dead quiet, no crickets, no frogs from the river. Just me, the shack, and that faint yellow glow. The closer I got, the stranger it seemed. The shack didn't sit right in the ground. The foundation wasn't sunk into the earth, it was like it had been set down on top of it. Heavy but not rooted. My boots crunched on pine needles, and I swear the sound didn't echo right. It was swallowed before it could carry. When I reached the door, I saw the handle was warm. Too warm. Like it had been sitting in the sun all day, though the night air was damp and cool. I should have walked away right then. Every part of me screamed to go. But I knocked instead, and when I did, the lantern went out. The dark that fell over me wasn't natural. It pressed against my skin like hands, like fabric being pulled over my head. I stumbled back, and I swear I heard movement inside, like someone dragging their feet across the floor. Then a voice spoke, soft as breath against my ear, though the door never opened. "You stopped too long," I bolted. I didn't look back. Didn't care if I dropped my keys, didn't care if something came running after me. I dove into my car, slammed the door, and tore off down Highway 59 so fast my tires spat gravel like gunfire. I didn't slow down until I saw the glow of the Nacogdoches city lights in my mirror. For days, I smelled that copper stink everywhere. It clung to my clothes, my hair, even the inside of my car. I burned the jacket I'd been wearing. It didn't matter. The smell stayed. Later, I learned that shack doesn't always look the same. Some folks say it's falling apart, boards missing, roof caving in. Others swear it looks like it was just built, clean and tight as a new barn. But no matter what, the lantern always burns, waiting for someone tired enough or curious enough to stop. And when they do, they don't come back. There's a list at the sheriff's office, though they won't admit it publicly. Families who filed missing person reports after their loved ones disappeared on that stretch of 59. Their cars are usually found on the shoulder, doors wide open, keys still in the ignition, engines cold like they hadn't run for hours even though the driver might have called home minutes before. I'll tell you the worst part. That shack shows up where it wants. Sometimes it's near mile marker 244. Sometimes 246, sometimes farther north past the Sabine line. And no one who's seen it twice lives long enough to tell the same story both times. I drive 59 almost every week for work, and I've never taken my eyes off the road since. If I see anything glow between the trees, I put my foot on the gas and don't let up until I'm miles past it. Because I know what waits if I stop too long. I know what whisper will come warm and hungry right against my ear. And I know there won't be anyone left in the world to tell my story if I listen to it twice. That shack is still out there tonight. Maybe just beyond your headlights, waiting for the sound of gravel under your tires. If you see its light, you'd better keep going. Because it already knows your name. The farmhouse sat just off a narrow county road outside Paris, Texas. The kind of place you'd pass without noticing if you weren't looking for it. The trees grew thick around the fence line, their shadows stretching long and thin across the gravel as dusk settled in. Folks around town whispered about the house, how you could see figures rocking in the chairs on the porch when the sun dipped low. They said you could count 3 or sometimes 4, just sitting there swaying slow as if the evening breeze pushed them. But anyone brave enough to walk up and check found only broken chairs, splintered and burned black as if a fire had chewed through them long ago. I heard these stories as a boy, sitting at the back table of my uncle's gas station, listening to the men with oil on their hands and beer on their breath. They spoke soft when the farmhouse came up, like they didn't want the place to hear them. My uncle used to shake his head and tell me to leave ghost stories for Halloween, but I noticed he always locked up early when the sky turned the color of copper and blood. Years later, after I'd grown and thought myself above fear, I found myself drawn to that place. It wasn't curiosity in the simple sense. It was more like a weight in my chest that kept tugging me down that road, telling me I had to see for myself. So one evening in late summer, when the air was sticky and the crickets screamed so loud it felt like the whole earth was buzzing, I parked my truck by the ditch and walked up the dirt path that led to the farmhouse. The house stood tired but not ruined, not like the burned-out wrecks I'd seen after grass fires. The roof sagged, the boards were gray with age, but it still held its shape like it was waiting for someone. The porch was wide, the kind of porch built for gathering, and in the dim light of dusk I swore I saw them rocking, shapes thin and stiff, moving in a rhythm that didn't match the wind. My gut turned cold and my legs wanted to stop, but I kept walking until the details sharpened. There were 4 chairs, or what was left of them, charred wood, legs snapped, wicker peeling and blackened. No one sat there. The boards beneath them were scarred too, deep burns that hadn't spread to the rest of the porch. I stood still, listening, and that was when I heard it. A creak, faint but steady, the unmistakable groan of wood moving under weight. It came in a rhythm, back and forth, though nothing touched those chairs. I stepped onto the porch and the sound stopped. The silence that followed wasn't natural. It pressed against me thick and heavy, as though the air itself was holding its breath. I tried to speak, maybe to call out a foolish hello, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I pushed open the front door. It swung easy, no lock, no resistance, just the hollow groan of hinges. Inside, the air smelled of wet ash and something sour, like meat left too long in the heat. The wallpaper peeled in strips, gray with mildew, and the floorboards bowed under my weight. I ran my hand along the wall and came away with soot on my fingers. Every room I stepped into felt empty and wrong, like the house had been lived in recently, but not by anyone alive. Dishes sat on a table, but the plates were fused into the wood, melted in strange, twisted shapes. A clock ticked on the wall, though its hands didn't move. I walked toward the back of the house, following a faint sound I couldn't place. At first I thought it was wind sneaking through cracks, but it grew clearer, sharper, the sound of voices whispering low and quick. I stopped in the hallway, my heart pounding so hard I felt it in my throat. The voices didn't stop. They came from the parlor, where the porch doors would open out to the rocking chairs. I stepped inside and everything was wrong. The air shimmered like heat rising off asphalt, and the room flickered with orange light, though no fire burned. 4 figures sat in chairs facing the window. Their outlines blurry but solid enough to hold shape. They rocked in unison, wood creaking with each motion, and their heads turned slowly all at once, toward me. The faces, or what should have been faces, were black hollows, empty sockets where eyes belonged, mouths open but not moving. Yet the whispers filled the room, words I couldn't understand, layered on top of each other until it sounded like bees swarming inside my skull. I staggered back, hit the wall, and the whole room seemed to bend toward me, like the house itself wanted me inside it forever. I ran then, through the hall, through the front door, leaping off the porch without touching the steps. I hit the ground hard, skinning my palms, but I didn't stop. The crickets were silent now, and the only sound chasing me was the steady creak of chairs rocking in perfect time. By the time I reached my truck, the sun was gone and the farmhouse was swallowed in shadow. I didn't go back, but I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every night after, just as the light faded, I'd hear it again in the distance, no matter where I was. The creak of wood moving slow, steady like breath. Some nights I'd wake to find the sound wasn't outside at all. It was inside, right there in my living room, as if 4 unseen figures had made themselves at home. Folks in town still talk about the farmhouse, though most won't admit they've seen it. Some say a family burned alive there one winter when the firewood ran out and they turned to kerosene lamps. Others claim it was already cursed, that the land itself rejected anyone who tried to settle on it. Me, I don't know the truth. All I know is that when the sun goes down and the sky bleeds red over Paris, Texas, those chairs still rock. And if you ever stop to look, don't go inside. Because once they notice you, they don't let you leave. Not really. The old sheriff's house still stands just outside Llano, leaning slightly as if the years have pressed their weight against the frame until the wood groaned. It's a 1-story place, nothing fancy, just a wide porch with chipped white railings, a sagging roofline, and a screen door that rattles in the wind like a caged door waiting to spring. Folks around town say you can still hear him there, Sheriff Earl McCutcheon, even though his body was lowered into the ground in 1964. They say his boots never stopped clomping along that porch. I didn't believe it at first. None of us younger ones did. But I'll tell you this, after what I saw, I don't walk within a mile of that place anymore. Not even when the moon is bright and the night is clear. Earl wasn't a good man. Not the way people like to remember sheriffs. He wasn't the type who shook your hand at the diner or tipped his hat when he saw your mama carrying groceries. He was mean in a quiet way. A mean that brewed slow and showed up when you least expected it. He had a temper, and the jingle of his spurs coming down Main Street was enough to make shopkeepers stand straighter and kids scatter off the sidewalks. Some folks say his badge gave him too much power, that he carried the law the way a drunk carries a pistol, ready to go off at the wrong second. When he died, half the town showed up at his funeral to make sure he was really gone. The house sat empty for a while after his widow passed, People bought it, sure, but they never stayed. A couple from Houston lasted a week before packing up in the dead of night. A retired school teacher from San Angelo tried making a garden out back, but she swore she'd wake in the early hours to boots pacing across the porch, heavy steps back and forth, until she screamed into her pillow. She left without so much as putting up a for sale sign. After that, no one stayed more than a few nights, and soon the place just became another part of the stories you'd tell at the bar when the beer had loosened everyone's tongue. I was 22 when my buddy Travis dared me to spend the night in there. It was summer, hot enough that the air felt thick as soup, and we were bored riding around town in his old Ford pickup with nothing to do but drink warm beer and scare ourselves with talk of ghosts. The house came up, of course. It always did. Travis grinned with that mean edge he had when he was sure he'd found a way to one-up me. "Bet you won't last till morning on that porch," he said. "Bet you'll be running home before midnight." I told him I'd not only last till morning, I'd go inside, sit in Earl's chair if I found one, and prove him wrong. That was the kind of stupid pride only a 22-year-old boy carries, and it's the kind that'll ruin you. We pulled up just after 11. The place looked worse at night, every window dark, every shadow too deep, as though the house itself was holding its breath. The boards on the porch were gray and warped, but they didn't look fragile, just tired. I stepped onto the first one and it groaned under my weight. Travis stayed by the truck, laughing, telling me to knock on the door and see if Earl answered. I told him to shut up, but my voice cracked, and I hated that. I pushed open the screen door. It squealed like it hadn't been touched in years, and stepped inside. The smell hit first, musty and stale, like wet earth and rotting paper. The air was thick, as though it hadn't moved in decades. My flashlight beam cut across peeling wallpaper, furniture draped in dusty sheets, and picture frames tilted on the walls. The floorboards creaked under me, each one a reminder that I was trespassing where I didn't belong. I found the chair in the corner of the living room, a heavy wooden rocker with its cushion eaten away by moths. That was supposed to be his chair. I sat in it mostly to prove I could, though my hands were slick with sweat on the flashlight. At first it was quiet. Too quiet. Even the crickets outside had gone silent, like the night itself was listening. Then came the sound. Heavy, slow, boots. On the porch outside. Clomp. Pause. Clomp. Back and forth, steady as a heartbeat. I froze, flashlight beam shaking across the floor. I wanted to believe it was Travis stomping around to scare me, but the sound was too heavy, too sure. Whoever it was, they knew that porch like they'd walked it their whole life. The footsteps stopped right by the door. I held my breath, staring at the wood, waiting for the handle to turn, for someone or something to step inside. Nothing. Just silence so deep I could hear my pulse in my ears. Then the screen door rattled. Just once, sharp and sudden, like a hand had slapped it. My flashlight flickered and died, plunging me into black. I scrambled to hit it, shaking it, and when the beam returned dim and sickly, I saw the outline of boots in the dust on the floorboards. They weren't there before. They were facing me, pointed straight at the chair where I sat. I couldn't breathe. My throat locked up. Then came the sound again, only this time from inside the house. Clomp. Across the living room, clomp, toward me. I bolted. I don't even remember standing. Just remember my body lurching forward, flashlight flying from my hand and shattering against the floor. The dark swallowed everything, but I didn't stop. I hit the door so hard it slammed against the siding and tore off one hinge. I flew down the steps, sprinting across the yard like the devil himself was after me. Travis had the truck running already. He must have heard something too. And I dove into the bed just as he floored it, gravel spitting out from under the tires. He didn't laugh. Not once. He just drove, jaw clenched, eyes locked on the road. When we finally stopped at the gas station, neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, he said, "I saw him." I asked what he meant, though part of me already knew. "Standing in the window," he said. "Sheriff Earl, hat and all, watching you." I didn't tell him about the boots inside, about how they'd stopped right in front of me. I didn't need to. We both knew we'd seen something we weren't supposed to. Years have passed since that night. The house is still there, though no one even bothers trying to sell it anymore. The town leaves it alone, lets it rot quietly on the edge of Llano. But sometimes when I drive past late at night, I swear I hear it again, that heavy clomp of boots pacing the porch back and forth, like the old sheriff still on duty, still keeping watch over a town that never wanted him but can't seem to shake him loose. And I know better than to stop. Because once you hear those boots up close, you never forget them. You never sleep the same again. And you sure as hell don't ever sit in his chair. On the southern edge of San Angelo, there stands a two-story house painted a pale, jaundiced yellow that has long since faded and blistered in the Texas sun. Locals call it the Yellow House, as if giving it a simple name made its existence easier to tolerate. Children on bicycles dare each other to ride past its fence after sundown, while old men in diners swear they remember when families lived there, though they can never quite recall their names. It is one of those places that sits in the back of a town's collective memory, shifting like a shadow you only catch in your peripheral vision. The house was built in the 1920s, back when the oil boom brought wealth to Tom Green County, and it once stood proud on a rise overlooking mesquite trees and dry fields. The glass windows were its pride then, imported and cut to reflect the light in strange ways. Even when the house began its long decline, even when the paint peeled and the porch sagged, those windows never cracked. Not in tornado seasons, not in hailstorms, not in decades of relentless wind. They only reflected. And what they reflected was the problem. People began noticing first in whispers. A man named Carter, who lived across the road in a trailer, swore that on quiet evenings he would see silhouettes move across the second-floor windows even though no one had rented the place in years. He said they didn't move like people, but more like film played too slow, their heads turning a fraction behind their bodies. Teenagers who sneaked up to peek through the dusty glass reported something worse. When they leaned close, they saw not themselves but strangers, sometimes whole families, sometimes a man in a suit with no face, sometimes a girl with eyes black as oil. The reflections didn't copy their movements. Sometimes they just stood and stared while the kids outside trembled. The story spread, as these things do, and the Yellow House became a rite of passage for restless young people in San Angelo. But it wasn't just a prank site. Strange things lingered after visits. One boy, 15, claimed he woke to see his own reflection standing at the foot of his bed, grinning a second too late when he screamed. A young woman swore she drove home after daring herself to touch the front door, only to catch in her rearview mirror a pale figure sitting in her back seat, staring out the opposite window. She crashed into a ditch before she could even scream. The sheriff's department investigated more than once but found only trespassing teenagers and broken beer bottles. No signs of squatters, no evidence of cult activity, nothing but the uneasy sense of stepping into a place that didn't want them there. Deputies said the air in the house felt heavy, like walking through syrup, and the silence was too complete. So thick you heard your own blood move in your ears. They filed their reports, locked the doors, and left the Yellow House to rot. But it never did rot the way old houses usually do. The beams sagged but never collapsed. Termites avoided the frame. The roof leaked but never gave way. And the glass stayed unbroken, bright even in the darkest storms, always reflecting people who were not there. It was in the summer of 1989 when the first real disappearance was tied to the house. A drifter named Elaine, known for walking Highway 67 with a pack of stray dogs, was last seen heading up the dirt path to the porch. Two kids on bikes watched her do it, laughing at her muttering, and then she was gone. The dogs returned 3 days later, whimpering, tails tucked, but Elaine was never seen again. The glass windows, however, showed her face for months afterward. A pale, blurred shape of her, hands pressed against the inside as though begging to be let out. Others followed over the years. A man delivering propane tanks. A runaway teenager. A pair of amateur ghost hunters who thought they'd make a name for themselves filming inside. Each time someone swore they saw the lost ones afterward in the reflections, trapped behind the glass, mouths open in silent screams. People whispered that the windows weren't windows at all, but something like a surface of water, holding on to every person foolish enough to stand too close. There was a man named Frank who owned land near there, and he was one of the few who tried to do something about it. In 1997, he drove his truck through the front fence, chain-hooked one of the porch posts, and tried to drag the Yellow House down. His truck's engine locked, all 4 tires blew out, and the porch remained standing as if untouched. Frank swore afterward that when he glanced at the glass, he saw his dead wife smiling at him from the other side, her skin pale and eyes hollow. He sold his property within the year and moved out of the county. The Yellow House became more than a dare, it became a wound in San Angelo, a place the town avoided but which bled into their dreams. Entire families moved away after glimpsing things in its windows while driving by at night. Children spoke of strangers waving at them from inside, though no one else saw. A preacher tried to bless it, sprinkling holy water on the door, but his reflection didn't match his gestures. When he lifted his hand in blessing, the reflection dragged a knife across its throat. He refused to ever go back. Even now, if you drive out past the limits of town and take the narrow road lined with brittle weeds, you will see it. Faded yellow paint, porch slumped low, glass shining clean as a mirror in the dusk light. If you look too long, if your headlights sweep across those windows, you may see more than your own face. You may see others watching. Some look desperate, some look angry, some smile too wide. And if you linger, if you let curiosity pull you from your car, if you step closer and lean to the glass, you might see yourself standing inside, staring out at the person you thought was you. And you will feel the awful truth, that the one outside is already empty, and the one behind the glass has been waiting. The yellow house in San Angelo still stands and its windows still shine, and no one can tell you for sure how many people are trapped inside, staring silently, waiting for the next fool who dares to meet their own reflection. The old ranch sat on the north side of Possum Kingdom Lake, tucked behind a line of blackjack oaks and mesquite that had grown thick enough over the years to almost hide it from the winding county road. Folks around Palo Pinto County didn't talk much about it anymore, though everyone knew it was still there. The way you know a scar is on your body, even if you don't look at it every day. It was the kind of place whispered about at gas stations or around deer campfires, never in broad daylight, as though saying its name too loud might stir something best left sleeping. The place had been built in the 1930s, a limestone ranch house with a tin roof and a wide porch that sagged toward the lake. But the real heart of it, the reason it lived on in rumor and dread, was the basement. Nobody knew why it had been dug so deep into the hard Texas earth, why it had heavy oak doors bolted with iron straps, or why it seemed to breathe when storms rolled across the lake. Every time thunder broke over the water, those doors would creak open, and if you stood close enough, you could hear voices, wet voices, broken voices, whispers that carried the gurgle of lungs filled with lake water. Old-timers said they were the drowned men, the ones who had gone missing from boats and fishing piers over the decades. Their bodies never recovered, their souls trapped in the soil beneath that ranch. I first heard about it from my uncle, who grew up near Grayford and spent his teenage years drinking cheap beer around that lake. He told me flat out never to go near the place, that even the game wardens avoided it, though nobody could say if the story was superstition or truth. But there was always something about forbidden places that tugged at me harder than safe ones. The lake itself didn't help. Possum Kingdom was wide, deep, and dark, with waters that looked black under moonlight, as though it could swallow anything without a trace. I'd been camping on its shores before, listening to coyotes crying in the brush, and even then I'd felt watched. There was a heaviness to the air, as though something beneath that still surface was aware of every move. One August evening, when the heat had finally given way to a wall of storm clouds, I drove out there alone. I told myself it was curiosity, maybe even a joke, a dare against nothing but wind and rumor. The sky bruised purple and green as lightning cracked across the water, throwing the ranch into stark relief. The roof shimmered with wet tin, and the walls seemed darker than they should have been, like the stone itself absorbed more of the storm than it should. The grass was high, seed heads brushing my thighs as I pushed through. My boots sank into the ground, which felt looser than the dry Texas dirt ever had any right to be. It was like stepping on lungs that flexed under the weight. The porch groaned under me. It smelled of rot and mineral dampness, not the dry cedar and mesquite smoke I'd expected. The front door hung crooked, a rusted lock still clinging to the jamb. Inside was worse, furniture covered in mold, wallpaper peeling in strips, the air thick with the kind of wet that makes your chest ache. But I didn't care about the rooms. I was listening. Underneath the crash of thunder, under the rain slashing at the roof, I could hear a sound from below, muffled and low. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the creak of wood. It was voices, rising and falling in broken unison like the sound of men trying to pray while drowning. The basement doors were around back. I knew that without being told. The storm shoved me forward, rain soaking my shirt, plastering my hair to my face. The yard sloped down toward the lake, and there they were. Two heavy oak doors set into the earth, chained with rust but straining as though something beneath was pressing against them. Every crack of lightning lit the wet iron. Every roll of thunder rattled the chains. And then I heard it clearly. Not muffled now, but sharp as a whisper in my ear. They were calling names. Not just random syllables, not just the watery drone of ghosts. Names, men's names. And then, God help me, mine. I don't know how long I stood there with the storm raging, the chains clanking against the doors, the voices pleading from the dark. I remember the lake rising high enough that the spray hit my face even though I was yards from the water's edge. The lightning flashed so bright I could see shapes pressing against the inside of those doors. The outlines of faces, mouths open, eyes wide, skin bloated with water. The storm wind shoved me forward until my boots scraped the edge of the doors, until my hand brushed the cold iron chain. And for one terrible instant I thought about unfastening it, about letting them out, about giving them what they wanted. My hand twitched toward the lock and the voices swelled, desperate and sweet, promising release, promising I wouldn't drown alone. The thunder broke so close it shook the ground and snapped me back. I staggered away, boots slipping in the mud, rain choking my breath. I don't remember leaving the yard, don't remember finding the road. Only that by the time I reached my truck, the storm seemed to fold back into itself. The lightning slowing, the rain easing like the rage had passed once I left. But I swear as I turned the key and the engine coughed to life, I could still hear them faint and patient, promising they'd wait for the next storm, promising they'd call again. Folks around the lake still talk about missing boaters, still talk about men who vanish when storms roll across the black water. They say the basement doors never stay shut, the chains can't hold back what wants out. I've never gone back. Not once, but some nights when thunder shakes the sky even 100 miles away, I wake up with lake water in my throat and voices in my ears. They never stop calling. They never stop waiting. And I know the next time I hear them that close, I won't be able to pull away. I'll open the doors. I'll let them in. The house sat across from the old rail yard in Alpine, Texas, where the desert wind pushed dust into drifts along the crumbling fence line. It wasn't much to look at. 2 stories of weather-worn clapboard and sun-bleached paint, leaning just enough to remind you time was winning. The locals called it the railroad house, though the trains that once rattled past had stopped running in the 1970s. The tracks were rusted. The station collapsed into weeds. Yet every person in town swore that at midnight the windows of the house filled with a flickering yellow glow, as if a passenger train had pulled right up to its side. Folks said you could even hear the whistle if you stood close enough, long and mournful, blowing across a track that no longer carried steel wheels. Randy Mitchell never put stock in such stories. He'd grown up in Fort Worth, gone to school in San Marcos, and only moved out to Alpine for the teaching job at Sul Ross University. The pay wasn't much, but he liked the quiet of the desert, liked the way the mountains hemmed in the horizon and the night sky spilled stars so thick it looked like a cracked lantern. He wasn't much for ghost tales. He figured folks out here in the dry emptiness needed something to break up the silence. Still, when he rented a room at the railroad house that fall, even he felt a twinge of unease. The landlord was a woman in her late 60s, thin as wire and just as tightly wound. Her name was Ms. Valdez, and she lived in a newer house a mile down the road. She only rented out the old place because her grandfather had built it, and she couldn't bring herself to sell. She gave Randy the key with a look that was half warning, half pity, and told him not to bother calling if he heard noises after dark. "You'll hear things," she said, her accent thick and her eyes narrowed. "But you don't open the door. You don't open no window either." Randy laughed it off, thinking she meant coyotes or maybe drunk students wandering out too far, but her expression didn't shift. It stayed pinched, and she kept glancing at the rail yard as though it were still alive. The first week passed without incident. Randy set up his books in the upstairs bedroom, the one that looked over the weed-choked yard, and spent his evenings marking papers or listening to the faint crackle of AM radio drifting up from Marfa. The house was old, with pipes that groaned and walls that swelled and shrank with the heat. But he liked its bones. He told himself he'd fix it up, maybe paint the porch, patch the sagging roof. At night, the desert wind crept through the cracks and carried the smell of creosote and dust. He slept light but not uneasy, not until the 7th night when something new stirred him awake. It was the sound of steel on steel, faint and far away like wheels clicking across joints in the track. He sat up in bed listening. The noise shouldn't have been there. The rails had rusted decades ago, warped and split under the heat. No train could run them now. Yet the rhythm was steady, hypnotic, and growing louder. His bedroom was dim, the clock on the nightstand showing 12:01, and that was when he saw it. A glow blooming across the window glass. Yellow, warm, like lanterns in motion. The way train cars used to glow when he was a boy visiting Dallas Union Station. The light rolled past the window as if car after car were sliding by just outside. His heart pounded, but curiosity pinned him in place. He leaned closer to the glass. For a moment he swore he saw silhouettes framed in the light. People standing in windows, their faces gray and hollow, pressed against the glass as though they wanted out. Then the glow vanished, swallowed by the desert dark, and the sound of wheels faded until there was only the whisper of wind through the weeds. Randy lay back in bed, trembling but trying to rationalize. Maybe it was headlights, some truck passing on the highway. Except Highway 90 was half a mile away, and no headlights moved in perfect rhythm like that. He told himself it was a dream, a trick of exhaustion, but he didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, when he walked down to the dry rail yard, he saw footprints in the dust between the warped tracks. Dozens of them pressed side by side like passengers disembarking. They weren't fresh, but they weren't old either, and they led toward the house before vanishing in the weeds. By the second week, the routine had set in. Midnight came, and with it the light. Some nights he heard the whistle, long and low, shaking the windows in their frames. Other nights he only heard footsteps creaking across the hall outside his room. Once the doorknob turned slowly, rattling like someone was trying to come in. He stayed frozen in bed, too afraid to move, too afraid to breathe, until it stopped. He thought of Ms. Valdez's warning then, her sharp gaze, and he understood why she never stayed. The railroad house wasn't empty at midnight. It was a station, and something still arrived. He might have left then if not for the dream. On the 13th night, he dreamt he was standing on the platform of the old depot, the one that had collapsed long before he was born. In the dream, it was whole again. Lanterns swinging from the rafters and a train idled on the track. Steam hissed and passengers shuffled in heavy silence, their faces hidden in shadow. A conductor raised a lantern and called Randy's name. Not once, not twice, but 3 times, and each time louder, like a summons. He woke sweating, his sheets damp, the echo of the whistle still lodged in his ears. The clock read 12:17, and from his window he saw the glow brighter than ever before. It wasn't just flickering past anymore. It was stopped. The light poured in steady, as if the train was waiting right outside. The next day he drove into town and asked questions. At the diner, the waitress pursed her lips when he mentioned the house. She told him her uncle had lived there in the 80s before he went missing one night without a trace. Others leaned in to whisper about families who rented rooms only to pack up in the dead of night, pale and shaken. They said the railroad house took people the same way the trains once took them out of town, carried them someplace you didn't come back from. Nobody said it outright, but Randy caught the glances, the way people measured him as if deciding how long he had left. The final night came with a storm. Clouds dragged across the mountains, lightning cutting the desert into shards of white, thunder cracking so loud the windows rattled in their frames. Randy sat at his desk with a bottle of whiskey, trying to steady his nerves, but when the clock struck midnight, the glow returned, brighter than ever. It filled the windows, yellow and trembling, and the whistle shrieked so loud it drowned the storm. He felt it in his bones, in his teeth, and he knew this was the night the conductor would call again. The floorboards shook under heavy footsteps. The walls hummed as though hundreds of people were pressing against them, and his doorknob turned. Slowly, firmly, until it opened. There was no one in the hall, only light, thick as fog, rolling toward him. In it, he saw faces, dozens of them, pale and waterlogged, mouths opening and closing in silent pleas. They weren't walking. They were being carried, pulled along like passengers crammed into cars. Randy tried to shut the door, but the light pressed through, warm and heavy, filling the room with the smell of hot iron and wet earth. A voice rose above the storm, the same conductor's voice from his dream, calling his name once, twice, 3 times. His body moved without his will, his legs carrying him to the stairwell, down into the front room where the windows blazed like furnace doors. Outside the house was no longer weeds and rust. It was a station alive again, and the train waited on shining tracks, steam hissing, lanterns swaying. The doors were open, and the shadows inside shifted like they were making space for him. Randy stepped onto the porch. Rain pelted his face, but it was drowned by the roar of the engine. He told himself to run, to fight it, but the light drew him forward. He put one foot on the track and then another, and when he reached the door of the waiting car, a hand reached out, cold as stone, and pulled him inside. The door slammed shut, and in that instant the glow vanished. The storm was all that remained, the yard empty, the house dark. When Ms. Valdez came the next morning, the key still hung in the lock, but the rooms were bare. His books, his clothes, his papers, all gone. She didn't search long. She had seen it before. She locked the door, turned away, and whispered a prayer in Spanish as she walked back down the road. By nightfall, the town already knew. Another tenant lost, another passenger taken, and when the clock struck midnight, the railroad house glowed again, its windows lit by a train that hadn't run in 50 years, waiting for the next soul to board. In Jefferson, Texas, there stands an old plantation home at the end of a dirt road lined with towering oaks, their limbs knotted like the fingers of the dead. Folks around town call it the Caldwell House, though the Caldwells themselves have been dust in the ground for well over a century. The house sits back from the road, pale against the dark thickets of pine, its wide porch sagging, shutters loose on their hinges. During the day it looks only tired, like a relic long past its time. But at night, when the cicadas quiet and the whippoorwills cry from the woods, something about it shifts. Travelers who've been foolish enough to stay overnight say they hear the clinking of silverware, the low murmur of voices, and the scrape of chairs being pulled across a polished floor. But when they rise and go to see, the dining room is still empty, just as it has been since the last Caldwell family dinner ended in tragedy, somewhere in the late 1800s. I never believed in those kinds of stories, not until the summer of 1996, when I was sent down to Jefferson on assignment for the regional paper. I was supposed to write about the town's history and its role during the Civil War, a filler piece for the anniversary of some long-forgotten battle. What drew me to the Caldwell house was not the history of the war, but the way everyone clammed up when I asked about it. In Jefferson, people will talk your ear off about anything, fishing in Big Cypress Bayou, the old hotels, the antique shops, but bring up that house and their eyes go flat. They change the subject or tell you it isn't worth your time. That, more than anything, made me want to see it. The caretaker, an old man named Harmon Lee, was the only one willing to take me there. He had a kind of wiry build, leathery skin browned from years in the sun, and eyes that seemed to look past you instead of at you. He kept the keys to the place and agreed to let me in if I promised to leave before dark. When I asked him why, he spat a dark string of tobacco into the dust and said, "Ain't nothing in that house that means you well after sundown." He handed me the heavy iron key anyway, like he knew I'd ignore his warning. The house smelled of age the moment I stepped inside. Not just the scent of old wood and dust, but something deeper, like soil turned too long, or wet cloth shut up in a trunk. The front hall stretched out into shadow, the kind that eats up light even when the sun is streaming through the windows. My footsteps echoed as I wandered through the rooms. Faded wallpaper peeled in long strips, a chandelier drooped with cobwebs, and there was an unnatural stillness, as if the house had been holding its breath for 100 years. I walked into the dining room, and it was just as Harmon said, empty. A long table sat under a heavy cloth, brittle with dust, the chairs pushed in neat against it, untouched. No silverware, no dishes, no sign that anyone had eaten there since the last century. And yet, standing there, I could almost imagine it. The family gathered, the candles burning, laughter bouncing off the walls. The air felt thick with the weight of memory. By the time the sun started dropping, I should have left, but curiosity kept me there. I set up my camera in the front hall, hoping to capture the shadows, maybe even something unusual I could spin into a story. I sat down in one of the parlor chairs and watched the light fade. The house shifted as the temperature dropped, wood creaking, the occasional scurry of mice in the walls. Then, just as the clock on my recorder hit midnight, I heard it. Faint at first, like wind through the trees, but steady. The clink of glass, the scrape of a chair, the muted rustle of conversation. My heart froze. It was coming from the dining room. I rose slowly and walked toward the sound, every step weighted with dread. The noises grew clearer the closer I got. I could hear a woman's laugh, light and fluttering, a man clearing his throat, the scrape of a knife against a plate. When I reached the doorway, the dining room lay just as empty as before. But the sound didn't stop. It surrounded me, the illusion so strong I nearly saw the figures there, their faces indistinct in the shadows, lifting forks, sipping wine, And then for a moment the dust cloth on the table moved as if stirred by hands I could not see. I should have run then. Instead, I did what any fool with a notebook would do. I sat in one of the empty chairs. The moment I did, the noise cut off like someone had slammed a door. The silence that followed was worse than the sounds. I sat frozen, waiting, every muscle tight. That was when I felt it, the brush of cold air against my cheek like someone leaning close enough to whisper. A faint voice, so close I could almost feel the lips, said, "You shouldn't have come." And then the chair beneath me jerked as though pulled back from the table. I stumbled up, my heart hammering, and the room seemed to tilt. For the first time since stepping into the house, I understood what Harmon meant. Whatever sat at that table did not want me there. I don't remember running down the hall, or fumbling the key at the door. Only the night air hitting me as I stumbled out onto the porch. The house loomed behind me, black windows staring like hollow eyes. I didn't wait for Harmon or anyone else. I drove straight back to town, the sound of laughter still ringing in my ears. I left Jefferson the next morning, without writing the piece I was supposed to. My editor chewed me out for it, but I didn't care. To this day, when I hear the scrape of silverware or the clink of a glass in a quiet room, I feel that same icy breath on my cheek. Harmon wrote me a letter a few weeks later. He said the key was mine now, that he wouldn't set foot in the Caldwell house again. No explanation, just the key taped inside the envelope. I keep it in a drawer, though sometimes I think I hear it rattling against the wood late at night as if someone is trying to use it. I'll never go back there, but the thought that the table is still set, the voices still murmuring through the night makes my skin crawl. And I know that someday someone else will be curious enough to sit in that empty chair. When they do, the Caldwells will be waiting. The shattered duplex in Houston's Fifth Ward looked like any other weather-beaten property on Lyons Avenue. Its paint blistered from years of Texas sun, its windows clouded with grime, and its porch sagging as though the earth itself was tired of holding it up. But if you asked around, if you pushed the older residents who still lingered on stoops with their coffee or brown-bagged beers, they'd tell you not to rent there. They'd lower their voices when they said it, glancing over their shoulders as if the cracked building might overhear. Blood, they'd say. It never leaves. No matter how you scrub, how you bleach, how you patch the floors or replace the walls, it seeps back like the house is sweating it out. The place had been on the market for years, rent dropping lower and lower until the only people who looked twice were those who couldn't afford better. That's how Marcus and Tasha ended up there. Two kids barely into their 20s, just out of patience with crashing on couches, sick of landlords who wanted first and last month's rent, plus credit checks they'd never pass. The duplex was cheap, close to the bus line, and the landlord had been eager to sign papers before they even stepped through the front door. They thought they were lucky. It started small. Tasha dropped a bag of groceries her first week because she thought she saw something dark spattered near the baseboard in the kitchen. She got down on her knees, scrubbing it with a sponge until it was gone. The next morning, Marcus walked in and asked why there was red by the sink. Tasha frowned because she knew she had cleaned it. But there it was again, a rusty brown smear climbing the wall. They blamed the building's age, the poor maintenance. Old pipes, mold, rust bleeding through plaster. They told themselves 100 excuses. But excuses don't hold up when the stains start to take shape. After a month, the smears weren't random anymore. They looked like fingerprints sliding down the wall. Sometimes handprints, too large to be Marcus's, too wide-fingered to belong to Tasha. Marcus was the first one to admit something was wrong. He woke her one night shaking, sweat running down his face, whispering that he'd heard something dragging across the hall, like heavy boots or maybe something being pulled. When he peeked into the living room, the streetlight outside caught the wall, and he swore he saw the stains glisten, wet as if freshly made. Neighbors didn't like to talk about the duplex, but an old man at the gas station finally broke. He said the place had a history, whispered while keeping his eyes on the lottery tickets in his hands. A murder years back, not one, not two, but a whole family. A man had gone crazy, beat his wife to death, then drowned his children in the bathtub before hanging himself. The duplex had been split after, remodeled poorly to make people forget. But the blood wouldn't. After hearing that, Tasha started to notice how the air inside never smelled clean. Even after she burned candles, sprayed Lysol, and opened every window, there was a coppery tang clinging to the walls, a smell you caught strongest at night, When the city outside went quiet, then came the sounds. Not just dragging anymore. Whispers under the floorboards, soft as though someone had pressed their lips right against the wood. Sometimes the words were clear. Help me. Sometimes it was just a hiss, broken by a wet cough like lungs full of water. The duplex seemed to want them awake. Lights flickered every time they tried to sleep. Their phones drained to zero overnight even when plugged in. The bloodstains grew bolder, climbing across the ceilings, dripping in places where nothing should drip. Once Marcus woke to feel something cold and damp squeezing his hand. He thought it was Tasha until he realized she was asleep facing the other way. He turned on the lamp and saw his palm slick with blood, though his skin wasn't cut. They fought about leaving. Tasha said they couldn't afford to move again. Marcus said he didn't care if they slept in his cousin's garage, he wasn't staying. The argument ended when the wall by the couch pulsed like a beating heart, spraying a fine mist of red across both of them. That was the night they ran. But the duplex doesn't let go easy. Marcus came back weeks later alone. He claimed he'd left his grandmother's Bible inside, the one she gave him before she died. He told Tasha he'd be quick. He wasn't quick. The police report said he was found in the living room, collapsed against the wall. His hands were bruised raw, fingernails torn from scratching at the plaster. They said it looked like he'd tried to dig something out, maybe a pipe, maybe rot. But when the section was cut open, all they found was wood and dust. No pipes, no rot, just the blood that began seeping again the moment the officers turned away. Tasha left Houston after that. She wouldn't even claim his body, said she couldn't bear to step foot back in the 5th Ward. The duplex is still there, windows boarded but not sealed, door padlocked but always loose if you push hard enough. Kids dare each other to go inside. Some come back pale, unable to talk about what they saw. A few never come back at all. The neighbors shrug when asked, because they know. Blood doesn't wash away there. It only waits. The walls drink in the scrubbing, the bleach, the paint, and then they breathe it back out. Darker, wetter, fresher than before. The stains are not just reminders. They're invitations. And if you're foolish enough to stay until nightfall, you'll hear it yourself. The dragging, the coughing, the whisper right against your ear, asking if you'd like to add a little more red to the walls. Because the house is always thirsty, always waiting for someone new to feed it. The limestone house sat off a dirt road outside Marble Falls, its pale walls catching the late afternoon sun like bones bleaching in a field. Folks in town talked about it in that hushed way people do when they'd rather not admit a thing exists at all. They knew it was still standing. They knew no one had lived there since the 50s, and they knew the well behind it had a voice. If you went close, if you lingered, you'd hear it pulling at you. Not with water rushing or wind echoing down its throat, but with the laughter of children. That was why parents in town told their kids to stay away. Though kids being kids, the warning only made it sound more like a dare. The house itself wasn't remarkable. Not in a town where limestone was common as dust and builders used it to raise churches, barns, and courthouses alike. But the way this one sat, half hidden by mesquite and cedar, made it feel like it was always waiting. The roof sagged, windows blank, the porch eaten through by termites, and the chimney leaning away from the house as if it wanted nothing to do with the place anymore. Beyond the back fence was the well, a squat stone circle with a rusted iron crank still hanging above it. No bucket, no rope, just an opening blacker than it had any right to be, even on the brightest days. It started with a boy named Lucas Kemp, 14, restless and sick of being told what not to do. He'd heard the stories all his life and figured it was just another ghost tale the old-timers used to keep kids from wandering too far. One July evening, he and a friend cut through the scrub behind the house, swatting away grasshoppers and sweating under the heat that hadn't loosened even after sunset. The cicadas were loud, but not loud enough to cover what came out of that well when they leaned over it. They said they heard giggling, faint at first like kids playing tag at the far end of a schoolyard. Then it got clearer, sharper, and the sound of little voices rose out of the dark. Lucas swore someone whispered his name. His friend ran. Lucas didn't. He went missing that night and they never found him. Not a footprint past the house, not a torn shirt or a dropped shoe. The sheriff wrote it off as a runaway, though no one in town bought that. His mother said she could hear him laughing at night faintly if she sat on the back porch and listened toward the hills. The limestone house got its reputation cemented after that, and over the decades the stories stacked up. A girl in the 70s who vanished on a dare. 2 teenagers in the 90s, drunk and trying to impress their friends who were last seen heading down the road toward the house. Their truck was found in the ditch the next morning, still warm, doors open, no sign of them. All anyone ever reported was the same thing. Laughter, always laughter, coming from the well. By the time I came into it, I wasn't chasing stories for the thrill. I'd been writing about the strange corners of Texas for years, ghost lights, drowned towns under lakes, old outlaw hangouts, places that kept their secrets buried deep. Marble Falls was supposed to be another stop on that list, and I didn't expect much when I asked about the limestone house. But the way people stiffened, the way even the youngest clerks at the gas station clammed up, told me it wasn't just a dusty folktale. I walked the property one August evening when the heat felt like a blanket pressing down on the land. The house was nothing but ruin now. The floors caved in, the walls shedding dust and lizards. But out back, the well was still there, solid as ever. The stone damp like sweat even though it hadn't rained in weeks. The air around it felt heavier, as if it pulled the summer night tighter the closer I got. I stood over it, careful not to lean too far, and for a long time there was nothing but the buzz of insects and the faint croak of frogs from the creek bed. Then, like it had been waiting for me to quiet down, I heard it. A small laugh, the kind a child makes when they're hiding and know you're close to finding them. Another joined it, higher, sharper, bouncing against the stone. It didn't sound like an echo. It sounded like they were right there, just beneath the lip. I froze. Every instinct told me to back away, but some part of me leaned closer. I thought I saw a movement down in the black. Not light, not shapes, just a shimmer like the surface of water catching a reflection that shouldn't exist. Then I heard the whisper, my name. Not shouted, not called, but breathed out like it was already known. Like they'd been waiting for me. The laughter swelled, louder now. Children tumbling over each other in joy, but underneath it I caught something else. Something darker threaded through their play. It was a sound like a choke or a sob, twisted into the rhythm of their giggles. I backed away fast, stumbled, nearly fell into the scrub. The voices kept going until I was 10 yards out, then cut off all at once like someone shut a door. I didn't sleep that night. I thought about Lucas, about the others, about what it meant for children's laughter to still be rising out of that hole decades after their bones should have turned to dust. I told myself I wouldn't go back, but 2 nights later I did, as if something in me had already been hooked. This time I brought a flashlight, a length of rope, and the resolve to see what was down there. I shined the light into the well. The beam didn't reach the bottom. It just dissolved into black like the dark swallowed it whole. The stone walls were slick, damp, and something about the mortar looked wrong, too smooth in places, as if hands had pressed against it from inside. I dropped a rock in, counting the seconds for it to hit. I never heard it land. But in the silence after, the laughter came again, dozens of voices this time, overlapping, building, rising up the shaft like water filling a chamber. They weren't laughing at play now. They were laughing at me. That was when I understood why parents warned their kids away. It wasn't just that the well lured them. It wanted them. It wanted their names, their faces, their small bodies leaning over the edge. It didn't keep the sound of children because children had fallen in. It drew them over and over to feed something that lived deeper than stone or water, something that learned how to mimic joy until it was close enough to grab. I left Marble Falls the next morning. I didn't write the story, not then. It felt wrong to put it down, wrong to give it more reach than it already had. But on the drive out, I passed a group of kids on bikes cutting down a side road toward the scrub. They were laughing too, the careless laughter of a summer evening. For a moment, I couldn't tell if the sound came from them or from somewhere deeper. Somewhere the road didn't lead, but the well surely did. And sometimes now, when the night is too still, I swear I hear it again. High, sharp, familiar. Not outside. Not in my yard. Inside, somewhere in the walls. Laughter, waiting. The rancher's estate on the northern edge of Amarillo was one of those places that locals passed quickly when the sun dipped down, their eyes fixed firmly on the road ahead, never glancing at the wide second-story windows that caught the light of dusk like dark mirrors. The house had been empty for decades, its fields overtaken by mesquite and Johnson grass, the fencing collapsed, the barn sagging. Yet in the windows above there were always figures. Not people, but mannequins, their plastic skin yellowed with age, their glass eyes hollow and wrong. their faces sculpted into frozen smiles that never seemed to catch the dust like the rest of the place. People swore that if you drove past 2 nights in a row, they would never be in the same position. A man in a cowboy hat today, a woman in a floral dress tomorrow, sometimes a small child standing between them. Nobody admitted to putting them there. Nobody wanted to be accused of breaking into that place. The story had become a dare for high school kids, a whispered legend that was passed like a curse from one generation to the next. The brave ones went out there, parked their trucks, and stared up into the windows. Some came back laughing, some came back pale and quiet, and some didn't come back at all. The first time I saw them, I was 17. My friend Clay was behind the wheel of his father's Ford, the bench seat crammed with 3 of us shoulder to shoulder. The heat was fading from the summer air, the crickets and cicadas screaming, and Clay, grinning that wild grin of his, slammed his palm against the steering wheel and pointed. "Look," he said. "They're up there." I leaned forward, my face pressed almost against the dusty glass of the windshield. And there they were, a man in a black suit and bolo tie, his plastic hand resting on the shoulder of a woman in a red dress with a high collar. Their faces were blank, but in the half-light of evening they looked almost real, like a couple standing still to be photographed in a time that had slipped away. Behind them, a small figure peered through the glass, a child with hair molded into stiff curls, lips puckered like it was about to speak. My stomach twisted. Clay laughed and punched my arm. "Told you," he said. We kept driving, but when I turned back in the side mirror, the window was dark and empty. No mannequins at all. I said nothing because I thought maybe it was the angle, maybe it was just my imagination, maybe it was better not to give words to what I saw. That night, I dreamed of the house. I dreamed of walking up the gravel path, my shoes crunching, the wide porch yawning open before me. The door was ajar, swinging a little as if someone had just gone inside. I pushed it open and the smell hit me, a smell not of dust and age like you'd expect, but of something damp and chemical, like formaldehyde in a school lab. The furniture was covered in white sheets, but underneath I could see the faint shapes of chairs and couches. In the dining room, the table was set with plates and silverware, a roast in the middle gone black and greasy with time. I heard footsteps upstairs. I went up. In the master bedroom, every wall was lined with mannequins, their heads turned toward me, their hands reaching slightly out, not touching, but close, so close. When I woke, my sheets were damp with sweat and I could still smell that cloying chemical rot in my nose. Over the years, I tried to shake it, but the place clung to me like a burr. After Clay died in a wreck on the highway, I couldn't stop thinking about the house. People said he'd been drinking, that he'd lost control, but I kept remembering how he'd been laughing that night when we saw the mannequins, how alive he looked, how sure. A month after his funeral, I went back alone. I parked on the side of the road, the tall grass brushing against the doors of my car, and looked up at the windows. They were there again. The man in the suit, the woman in red, the child in curls. Only this time they were closer to the glass, their faces nearly pressed to it, as if they'd been waiting. The child's hand was lifted, palm open, almost like a wave. My throat tightened and I told myself it was just a prank, some sick trick by kids who'd broken in. But the house had no power. The ranch had been abandoned since the 70s when the last owner, a man named Wheeler, disappeared without a trace. People said his family left in the night, never to be seen again. Some whispered that they didn't leave at all, that something kept them there, staring out through glass eyes. I don't know why I did it, but I opened the car door and stepped out. The air felt heavy, hotter than it had on the road, like the heat was trapped around the house. The weeds whispered around my ankles as I walked up the broken path. The porch groaned under my weight, the board soft as sponge. I reached out and touched the doorknob, and to my shock, it turned easily. The door opened with a slow creak, and the smell hit me just like in the dream. Damp chemical sour. Inside, the light was dim, but I could see enough to make out the shrouded furniture, the wallpaper peeling in strips, the floor warped with water damage. My stomach turned, but I forced myself forward. A staircase rose up from the hall, its banister coated in dust. I put my hand on it and felt the grit cling to my skin. My footsteps echoed too loud, and in that silence I realized something that made my blood run cold. The crickets outside had stopped. The air was dead. The house was listening. I climbed. Each step groaned under me, but I kept moving, one hand tight on the railing. At the top, the hallway stretched out, lined with closed doors. I knew which one to open. I knew because I'd seen it in the dream. The master bedroom door stood just slightly ajar, and the faintest strip of light glowed from the crack. I pushed it open. Inside they stood. Not just the three from the window, but dozens more. Men in ranch clothes, women in dresses, children with frozen smiles. Their faces were smooth and blank, their glass eyes reflecting the faint light. They were arranged around the room in a circle, all of them facing inward toward the bed. And on the bed was a figure that made my knees buckle. It was a mannequin too, but its face was different. Its mouth was wide, not carved into a smile, but stretched open as if screaming. Its hands were clenched into fists, and worst of all, its chest rose and fell, slow and shallow, as if it were breathing. The air stank of rot and plastic. I stumbled backward, slamming into one of the figures, and its head turned, its glass eyes fixing on me. I bolted. I tore down the stairs, across the hall, out the door into the night. Behind me, I thought I heard the thump of many feet following. But when I reached the car and turned back, the windows were empty again. Black and silent. I never went back after that. I told myself it was my imagination, that grief and guilt had twisted me up, that the house was nothing but an empty shell. But I still drive by sometimes, and I still see them standing in the upstairs windows. Only now there are more of them, packed close together, their faces pressed almost against the glass. And sometimes, if I look too long, I think I see a new figure among them, someone I recognize. A friend, a neighbor, a boy who never came home. Their eyes catch mine, and I know it's only a matter of time before I'll see myself staring back. The desert outside Marfa has a way of swallowing sound. I remember the first time I drove past that house, the one people call the ghost house, and all I could hear was the crunch of gravel under my tires and the soft hum of my engine dying when I pulled over. The place stood alone against the horizon. No neighbors within shouting distance, just mesquite and scrub brush stretching out toward the jagged outline of the mountains. I had heard the stories, of course, everyone in town had. But it's one thing to hear whispers in the diner, and another to see a dead house staring back at you with windows that seem more alive than the walls that hold them. The ghost house looked like something dragged out of the ground rather than built by men. Its wood was gray, sun-baked, splintering, and the roof sagged as if the desert sky had pressed down on it for too long. Windows jagged with broken glass reflected the last red streaks of sunset. And that was when I saw it, the first flicker, a faint pulse like a lantern lit for just a breath and then snuffed out. It wasn't coming from inside like a man's lamp would, but timed with the sky itself. Every flash of lightning in the far-off clouds seemed to echo through the panes, and even when the storm drifted off, the rhythm stayed. Like the house had learned the desert's heartbeat and was repeating it. The first night I parked out there, I thought maybe it was kids, locals who liked to keep the stories alive. But the house was empty. I walked the perimeter, kicked through weeds that had grown taller than my knees, and the only footprints I found were mine. Still, the light kept twitching, always from the second floor, always from the window on the right, like a dying star refusing to go black. I didn't stay long that night. My stomach was tight, and the wind carried the smell of something sour and rotting, though there wasn't a carcass in sight. It wasn't until a week later that I went back with my cousin Tom. He'd grown up in Marfa, said he'd been daring enough as a teenager to throw rocks at the house, but never to step inside. When I told him I'd seen the flickers, his face hardened in that way people get when they remember something they'd rather forget. Still, he came with me. We parked on the side of the road and sat on the hood of my truck with a six-pack, waiting for the desert to fall silent. Around midnight, the lights began again, pulsing slow and steady, and Tom whispered, "That's them." When I asked him who, he wouldn't answer, just shook his head and took a long drink. I couldn't leave it at that. I wanted to know what it was. So I climbed the steps, each one groaning under my boots, and pushed the door open. The air inside was dry, choking, filled with the smell of plaster and dust. Every wall was covered in peeling wallpaper, layers of it stripped back like old skin. The floorboards creaked with every step, and the silence pressed hard on my ears. I climbed the staircase, slow, careful, as the flickering light grew brighter through the cracks above. Tom wouldn't follow. I heard him outside cussing under his breath, saying my name like a warning. At the top of the stairs, the hallway stretched in both directions, shadows thick and deep. The light was spilling out from the room on the right, the same window I'd seen glowing from the road. I put my hand on the doorknob, cold as iron though the desert night was still warm, and pushed it open. The room was empty. No lamp, no bulb, no fire, just bare wooden walls and a warped floor. But the light came anyway, spilling across the walls in a rhythm, washing the room in a pale blue glow that pulsed like a heartbeat. I stepped in, and that was when I noticed it. The glow wasn't bouncing off the walls, it was seeping from them. The wood itself was alive with it, veins of light crawling between the boards, matching the rhythm of the desert sky. I should have left. I should have run back down those stairs and never looked at the place again. But I stood there, rooted as the glow grew stronger, brighter, until the walls themselves seemed thin and stretched like parchment held to a flame. And then I saw shapes, faces pressed against the boards from the other side. Mouths open, eyes wide, pale hands pushing forward as if they were drowning inside the walls themselves. The rhythm quickened, beating hard now, frantic, and I realized it wasn't the desert sky the house was echoing. It was them. Their hearts. Their panic. Their endless struggle to claw their way out. I stumbled back, heart hammering in my chest, and tripped over a loose plank. The moment I hit the floor, the lights cut off, plunging me into darkness so sudden I thought I'd gone blind. I scrambled to my feet and ran, smashing into the doorframe, slamming down the stairs 2 at a time, not stopping until I burst outside. Tom grabbed me, his eyes wide, and before I could speak, he dragged me to the truck. We didn't look back until we were 10 miles down the highway. The house nothing more than a black silhouette against the stars. I never went back after that. But sometimes when I drive through Marfa at night, I catch it again from the corner of my eye. The windows glowing faint and steady, pulsing with that terrible rhythm as if the house itself still remembers me. And I swear, when the desert is quiet enough, if you roll down the window, you can hear it. Voices behind the flicker, whispering, begging, pleading with anyone who dares to step close. Some say it's just the Marfa lights, those strange desert orbs that dance along the horizon. But I know the difference. The lights in the sky are free. The ones in the ghost house are trapped, beating and burning inside the wood, and the desert keeps them prisoner. The locals still cross themselves when they drive past at night. And I do too, because the rhythm never stops. It only waits, pulsing in time with the sky, waiting for the next fool to open that door and listen. When you grow up along the Texas Gulf Coast, you hear the old stories whispered by folks who've been around longer than the seawall. Most of them sound like campfire tales, things you tell kids to keep them from wandering too close to the water when a storm's rolling in. But in Galveston, some stories stick. The storm house was one of those. It wasn't called that on any map or deed, but if you asked anyone old enough to remember the hurricane of 1900, they'd point to the same sagging Victorian on the corner of Avenue O and 35th. Pale blue paint peeling like sunburnt skin, front porch drooping under the salt air, shutters clattering in the wind even when the day was calm. The house looked waterlogged even a century later, as if it had never really dried out. I first heard about it when I moved to Galveston for work. I rented a small apartment above a bait shop near the harbor, and at night the fishermen would gather outside drinking Lone Star, swapping tales of storms past. They'd bring up the big one, the hurricane that wiped out thousands, and someone would always mention the storm house. They said when the floodwater came that night in 1900, the family inside didn't make it. The surge filled the room so fast the neighbors heard the screams cutting off like a door slammed shut. Ever since, the place hadn't been right. No one stayed long. Renters packed up within weeks. Realtors avoided it. Kids dared each other to peek through the cracked boards and swear they saw chairs and tables floating upside down against the ceilings. I wasn't the type to buy into ghost stories, but Galveston had a way of wearing you down. The salt wind seeped into everything. The sea smell clung to your clothes, and the cries of gulls followed you even inland. When a storm blew in, shutters banged, the power flickered, and you could almost believe the dead were restless in their drowned city. One night, after too many beers, I let myself be talked into walking over there. The street was empty, washed silver by the moon. The house stood alone, its roofline jagged, windows dark holes. I should have left it at that, but I found the back door hanging crooked and pushed it open. Inside, the smell hit me first, stale, damp, like seaweed rotting on the beach. The wallpaper had peeled away in curling strips, revealing swollen wood beneath. I stepped into the parlor and froze. The furniture was all wrong. A couch, 2 armchairs, a low oak table. They were pressed against the ceiling as though gravity had flipped. Their legs pointed down at me like teeth. I blinked, rubbed my eyes. The beer must have been stronger than I thought. But the furniture didn't waver. It bobbed gently as if resting on some invisible tide. A lamp slid across the ceiling, bumped a wall, and drifted back. I felt a cold trickle run down my spine. The air was heavy, humid, making my lungs ache with each breath. Then came the sound. Water sloshing, though the floors were dry. I heard it in the walls, a dull roar like surf muffled behind plaster. The temperature dropped, the air thickened, and suddenly I wasn't alone. Shapes shimmered at the edges of the room, faces pressed against the wallpaper from the inside, mouths open in a silent scream. A child's laugh bubbled up from the hallway, high-pitched, watery. I stumbled back, nearly tripping, and turned to leave. But the front door was gone. Where it should have been was nothing but a solid wall, damp and streaked with salt. I spun around. The house had changed. The staircase sagged under streams of water trickling down the banister. The wallpaper wept. My boots squelched on boards that swelled beneath my weight. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A man in suspenders, his face pale and swollen, drifted down the hallway as though carried on a current. His eyes were wide, his jaw slack. A woman followed, hair streaming behind her as if underwater. They didn't walk. They floated, twisting slowly, arms reaching in jerks and spasms. Children trailed after them, small limbs flailing in silence, their mouths blowing bubbles that weren't there. The furniture above me creaked, shifted, and then crashed down without warning. I dove aside as the couch slammed into the floor, spraying droplets of brine across the room. The oak table split down the middle, spilling more water, as though it had been full of it. The smell of the sea grew unbearable, thick and fishy, clinging to my skin. I bolted for the back door, the one I'd come through, and found it wide open now. But beyond it wasn't the night street. It was black water, endless, churning with pale limbs, rising and sinking like driftwood. A hand shot up, grasped the frame, and for a moment I thought it would pull itself inside. I slammed the door shut with all my strength, heart hammering in my chest. The walls groaned. Glass shattered overhead. A wave of icy water burst from the parlor, knocking me off my feet. It was only a few inches deep, but it pulled at me with unnatural force, dragging me toward the front of the house where there was no door, only wall. I clawed at the banister, splinters cutting into my palms. The water kept rising, swallowing the stairs, licking at my chest. The drowned family drifted closer, eyes rolling in their bloated faces. The woman opened her mouth and seawater poured out in a steady stream, flooding the floorboards. I don't remember how I got out. Maybe I blacked out. Maybe the house spat me out like something it didn't want. But I woke up face down in the street, coughing brine, my clothes soaked through though the night was dry and still. Behind me, the storm house stood quiet. Windows dark, no sign of water anywhere. I left Galveston not long after, packed what I could fit in the back of my car and drove until the ocean smell faded. Folks say the storm house still stands. They say during hurricanes, when the surge comes up and the wind howls, you can hear screams and furniture smashing around inside, though the house never takes damage. And sometimes when the sky clears and the tide goes back out, the neighbors find puddles of salt water on their porches, filled with tiny fish gasping for air. I tell myself it was just the beer or the power of suggestion, or maybe I fell asleep in that bait shop apartment and dreamed it all. But when I close my eyes at night, I feel the pull of unseen currents tugging at my legs, hear the bubbling laughter of children from beneath the floorboards, and wake with the taste of seawater burning my throat. The desert around Big Bend has a silence that can get under your skin if you let it. It's not the same as the quiet you'd find in a forest or a small town. It's the kind of silence that seems to lean on you, to press into your ears until you hear your own blood moving. The locals will tell you that the desert keeps secrets, that it has its own way of holding on to things people would rather forget. You hear enough stories out there about lost hikers, about headlights that never belonged to any truck, about whispers on the wind, and you start to wonder if the sand and rock don't just bury bones but memories too. And if you're unlucky, the memories climb back out. That was the feeling I had the night I stayed in the cabin. It was nothing much to look at from the outside. A squat shape of weathered wood, patched up with whatever scrap someone had on hand at the time. The boards were gray, nearly silver from sun and wind, and the roof sagged on one side as if it were tired of trying to stand against the desert's patience. There was a small porch with one broken chair. No electricity, no running water, just four walls and a place to sleep. My friend Gabe had convinced me to join him on a weekend camping trip near the national park. He was the type that lived for ghost stories, the kind who thought a haunted place was a good backdrop for a drinking night. He mentioned the cabin almost casually, like he was offering a dare instead of a place to spend the night. The first thing I noticed inside was the smell. Old wood and dust, but underneath that something faint like damp earth or rot. The cabin had only one room, with a cot shoved in the corner and a stone fireplace that hadn't seen use in years. The floor was uneven, and in some places the boards looked darker, swollen as though water had gotten to them. That didn't make sense. We were in the middle of the desert. No leaks, no reason for wood to be waterlogged. Gabe dropped his pack and laughed when he saw my face. "Don't tell me you've heard the story," he said. I shook my head, though I had already heard enough whispers from locals in Terlingua to piece together something. People claimed they heard knocking when they camped there, a steady thumping under the boards like someone trapped and begging to be let out. Gabe grinned when he saw me hesitate. "It's just an old tale. The kind of thing they tell to keep tourists on their toes." He cracked open a beer and settled into the broken chair like he had nothing to fear. We lit a lantern and let the desert night come down around us. The wind picked up, carrying the dry smell of sage and dust, and the coyotes started their chorus somewhere off in the dark. It was peaceful in a way. The kind of silence you only get when the rest of the world has forgotten you. For a while it was easy to believe that the cabin was just another abandoned place. No different from the rusting cars you sometimes find half buried in the sand. But then the knocking started. It was soft at first, so faint I thought maybe I imagined it. A dull tap from beneath the floor spaced evenly like a heartbeat. I looked at Gabe, but he just raised his eyebrows and smirked, waiting for me to react. Then it came again, louder this time. A hollow thud from under the cot, strong enough to make the lantern's flame quiver. Gabe's smirk faltered. He set down his beer and leaned forward. We both held still, waiting. The knock came again, then again, a steady rhythm, 3 beats, pause, 3 beats. The kind of sound you'd make if you were trapped and wanted someone to hear you. My throat went dry. I knelt and pressed my hand to the floor. The wood was cold, much colder than it should have been. The tapping vibrated through it, like something real was moving down there. "Probably animals," Gabe muttered, but his voice didn't sound certain. He grabbed the lantern and set it on the floor. "Rats, maybe." But when he said it, the knocking stopped, as if whoever or whatever was under there had been listening. We didn't speak for a long time after that. The desert outside was black, the stars sharp enough to cut you, and inside that little cabin the air had turned heavy. Every creak of wood made my stomach tighten. I kept waiting for the sound to start again, telling myself it was nothing, that it had to be nothing. But deep down I knew better. At some point, Gabe decided to test the floor. He pulled the cot aside and knelt, running his fingers along the seams between the boards. The wood there was darker, warped, like it had soaked up something. He pressed one of the boards, and for a second it gave, soft under his weight. That smell of damp earth rose stronger. He looked at me, eyes bright in the lantern light. "Something's under there," he whispered. I told him not to, but Gabe always needed to see things for himself. He fetched a knife from his pack and started prying at the edges. The board splintered with a groan, and the smell hit us like a wall. Not damp earth this time. Something worse. Sour sweet like meat gone bad. I gagged and told him to stop, but he had already worked the board loose. Beneath was darkness. No crawl space, no stone foundation, just a pit dug into the ground. The lantern's light only reached so far, but I saw wet soil clumped against the edges, like the earth had been disturbed and never settled right again. Then, faint and deliberate, the knocking came again. But now it was rising from the pit itself. We both staggered back. Gabe dropped the board and it clattered across the floor. I swear to this day I saw something move down there just at the edge of the light. Not a hand exactly, but something pale, pushing up from the dirt before sinking back again. The knocking grew louder, frantic, as if whatever it was didn't want us to look away. That broke me. I grabbed my pack and told Gabe I was leaving, storm or no storm. He didn't argue. We both stumbled out into the desert night, the lantern swinging wildly, throwing shadows across the sand. We didn't stop until the cabin was a dark shape behind us, swallowed by the emptiness. We camped out in the open that night, too shaken to sleep, watching the cabin from a distance. The lantern light inside flickered even after we'd left it behind. And once I swear I saw the board shift like the floor itself was breathing. We didn't go back in the morning. We just walked until we found the road and hitched a ride back to town. Later, an old man in Terlingua told us his version of the story. Said the cabin was built over a dry well, and back in the early days a family had tried to make a home there. The children disappeared first, one by one, gone without a trace. Then the wife. People said the husband went mad searching, digging at the earth until he finally climbed down and never came back. Folks claimed the ground there was cursed, that it swallowed people whole. And sometimes when the desert was quiet enough, you could still hear him knocking from beneath, waiting for someone foolish enough to open the floor again. I never saw Gabe after that trip. He stopped answering calls, stopped showing up in town. I heard rumors he went back to the cabin alone. Some nights when I think about it, I wonder if he heard the knocking again, if he listened too long, and if the desert finally decided to keep him. Out there, nothing really dies. It just waits beneath the floorboards, patient, knocking until someone answers. El Paso is a city of winds and dust, where the desert swallows what people leave behind. There is a building a few blocks from the border that has no business still standing. It had been a post office once, back when mail still mattered, back when the clack of typewriters echoed from its narrow offices and the thick smell of ink and paper clung to the air. The government sold it decades ago when newer buildings went up. A family tried to make it a house in the 70s, bricking over the wide mail slots and turning the back rooms into bedrooms. They lasted 2 years before packing their things in the middle of the night. Since then, no one stayed longer than a month. The wood warped, the roof sagged, yet the front porch remained oddly intact. And it was on that porch that letters began to appear, all in the same cramped, hurried hand on yellowing envelopes sealed shut with no stamps or addresses, only one sentence written across the front. "Don't look outside tonight." People said they saw them stacked like offerings, 10, 20 at a time, fluttering in the wind before the dry desert heat pinned them down. The sheriff's office tossed them away. Teenagers dared each other to take one home, though no one admitted what was inside. One man, a janitor from the nearby high school, took a handful and burned them in a barrel. He was found in his car the next morning, dead of a heart attack, eyes wide open as if he had been staring at something far too long. The car doors were locked from the inside and the engine was still running. After that, folks stopped touching them. They piled higher until the porch looked like a drift of dirty snow. I came to El Paso chasing ghosts of my own. A divorce, a job lost in Dallas, too many debts and not enough excuses. I had a cousin who said I could watch over his mechanic shop for a few months, keep an eye on things while he drove rigs out of state. He gave me the keys and said, half laughing, that if I wanted cheap rent I could try the post office house. No one wanted it, and the owner was happy just to see someone paying the water bill. The idea of living in a broken post office sounded like something I'd regret, but I didn't have many choices. By the time I hauled my duffel in, the sun was gone and the letters on the porch whispered with the wind. I kicked a few aside with my boot and told myself they were nothing more than old jokes that got out of hand. Inside, the place smelled of dust and glue. The floor creaked in long, tired sighs. The front lobby had been converted into a living room, though the cracked tiles still spelled out postmaster in faded blue. There was an old counter bolted against the far wall, and behind it were narrow hallways that once carried the mail clerks back and forth. Someone had painted the walls a sickly yellow years ago, and the paint bubbled now like blisters. I picked the least broken bedroom, spread my blanket on a sagging mattress, and told myself I'd only stay a few weeks. The city hummed outside with its low desert wind, trucks roaring past on the highway, dogs barking in yards. Nothing strange, just another cheap roof. The first night I woke to a sound like someone dropping pebbles on the window. Tap, tap, tap. I rolled over and saw the blinds trembling, though the glass was shut. When I sat up, it stopped, and I told myself it was just the branches scraping. But there were no trees near the window. The yard was nothing but sand and tufts of dry weeds. I pulled the blanket over my head and lay awake until dawn. On the porch that morning, more letters had been added to the pile. They looked fresh, the ink wet and black, though it hadn't rained and no one had been near. Each envelope had the same words. "Don't look outside tonight, I should have left then. Anyone with sense would have." But desperation makes fools of us all. Rent was cheap, and I told myself maybe some kids were sneaking around playing pranks. I started tossing the letters into a plastic bin out back. By the end of the first week, the bin was full. The next night, they were back on the porch again, stacked neatly as if someone had set them there with care. I asked around the neighborhood. An old woman selling tamales from a cooler on the corner told me to mind my business. She said that house had been marked long before I was born, back when men in uniforms used it for more than just mail. She spat on the ground and told me the desert never forgets. When I pressed her for more, she turned her eyes away and wouldn't sell me anything. The second week was worse. The tapping came every night now, not just at the windows, but at the doors, the walls, the ceiling. Sometimes soft, sometimes hard, like fingernail scratching. I stopped sleeping. My hands shook when I tried to work at the shop. My cousin called and said I sounded half dead. He joked I ought to get laid or get out. But when I went home that evening, the porch was covered in letters again, and in the dim light I swore the writing had changed. The words tilted upward now, hurried, desperate. Don't look outside tonight. Don't. The night it broke me was a Wednesday. The sky turned a deep bruise purple, and the wind carried grit that stung my face. I locked every window, every door. I dragged a chair against the front knob. When darkness swallowed the house, the tapping began. Slow at first. Tap, tap. Then faster, like dozens of hands rapping on the wood and glass, circling me. My throat dried up. I buried my face in the pillow and told myself not to move. The letters had been warning me. Don't look outside tonight. Don't look. Don't. I don't know how long I lasted before curiosity and terror twisted together and I made the mistake. I lifted the edge of the blind with 2 fingers and looked out. The street was empty, but the air moved strangely. Shapes stood in the sand, tall and bent, like men whose bones had been broken and set wrong. Their faces were shadows, their mouths too wide. Dozens of them, swaying together, tapping the walls with long, thin fingers. And every one of them turned toward me the instant I looked. The tapping stopped. The silence was worse. They stood without moving, their heads tilted at angles that made my stomach turn. I dropped the blind and stumbled back. The house groaned around me, the walls seeming to bow inward. My ears filled with a high whine, and I swore I heard voices whispering through the cracks. Not words I knew, but something that slid under my skin like ice water. I don't remember falling asleep. I woke at dawn with the blind still shut, the porch buried in letters again. Hundreds of them, stacked higher than before. My throat ached from screaming, though I had no memory of doing it. I stuffed clothes into my bag and fled before the sun was high, never once looking back. The landlord never asked for the keys. No one lives there now. The porch still gathers its letters. If you pass by on a windy night, you'll see them fluttering, each one in the same black hand whispering a warning no one listens to. Don't look outside tonight. Don't. The house sat on a lonely stretch of land in Johnson County, an old clapboard structure sagging against the weight of years and silence. Behind it, shaded by twisted pecan trees, was the well. The stones were gray and worn smooth by time, their mortar crumbling, but the circle of it stood straight and unbroken, as if determined to outlast the house itself. People in town used to say that the well was older than the county, older than Texas, dug by hands that no one remembered. They said no one had drawn water from it in decades, yet at night it carried voices. Pleading, desperate voices that begged to be pulled up. The first time I saw the place was on a humid afternoon in June, the air thick with the smell of cut grass and road tar. I had driven out from Cleburne to meet with a realtor, who seemed eager to unload the property for cheap. Cheap was what I needed. I was recently divorced, my money thin, my future thinner, and there was a stubborn part of me that believed I could start over if I could just plant myself somewhere steady and quiet. The well house, as the realtor called it, seemed as good a place as any. The house was tired, but I've always had a soft spot for tired things. The porch slouched forward, paint peeling in flakes like old sunburn. Inside, dust lay over everything in a soft gray film. Floorboards creaked underfoot as if murmuring complaints about my intrusion, but it had bones, as they say. And when I stood at the back door and looked out across the yard toward the well, I felt something I couldn't explain. It wasn't comfort, but it wasn't dread either. It was more like expectation. As if the place had been waiting for me, I bought it within the week. The papers went through quick, almost suspiciously quick, and I found myself with keys in my pocket and a heavy new silence pressing on my shoulders. Moving in took only 2 trips. My life had been whittled down to a few boxes, a mattress, and a kitchen table I had dragged from my old place. The first night I sat at that table with a sweating can of beer and stared out the back window at the well. The moonlight silvered the stone, and the trees shivered in a breeze I couldn't feel through the screen. For a long while nothing happened. Then I thought I heard something faint and low, like a voice carried on wind from far away. I told myself it was my imagination, that houses always spoke to you when they were empty and strange, and I went to bed convincing myself I believed it. But the voices didn't stop. The second night I heard them again while smoking on the back steps. A murmur at first, then clearer. A man's voice, hoarse and urgent, rising out of the darkness where the well sat. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. pleading. I froze, beer halfway to my lips, the hair on my arms prickling stiff. The sound faded after a minute, swallowed by the crickets and cicadas. I went to bed but didn't sleep well, tossing until dawn painted the sky pale. By the end of the week, I couldn't deny it anymore. The voices were real. Sometimes one, sometimes several, whispering or calling out, always between dusk and dawn, never in daylight. Some sounded like children. Once I swore I heard a woman crying. They didn't sound evil, not exactly. They sounded like people who had been buried alive and wanted out. And the strangest thing, their words began to take shape, becoming clearer each night. "Pull us up," they said, "please. Pull us up." Curiosity gnawed at me, though fear tried to keep me away. I found myself standing by the well one night, flashlight in hand, staring down into the black circle. The beam cut only a few feet before the dark swallowed it whole. I dropped a stone and counted, no splash. Just silence so deep it made my ears ring. When I turned away, I swore I heard laughter rise from below, sharp and thin like nails scraped against metal. I told myself I was losing it. Stress from the divorce, loneliness, maybe even some kind of auditory hallucination. I stayed away for a few days, throwing myself into small repairs in the house. But the voices persisted, more insistent now, rising earlier in the evening, louder. Sometimes they called my name. The first time I heard that, I dropped a hammer clean through the floorboards. No one knew me here, no one but the realtor, and I doubted she was crawling into a dry well at night to play games. One morning I drove into town and stopped at the diner. It was the kind of place with cracked red booths and a coffee pot that never ran dry. I asked an old man at the counter, careful to make it sound casual, if he knew anything about the house I'd bought. He squinted at me, his face lined like dry riverbeds. "You mean the well house?" he said, and when I nodded, he chuckled without humor. "That place has stories older than me. Folks say people disappeared there way back. Farmhands, travelers, even kids. Never found. But they say if you stand out there at night, you can hear 'em calling from the well, begging for somebody to bring 'em back up. Best advice I can give you? Don't listen." I laughed it off in front of him, but my hand shook on the steering wheel all the way home. That night, the voices were so loud they woke me from sleep. The sound filled the house, seeping through the floorboards and walls as if the well had opened beneath my bed. They were screaming now, dozens of them. Voices tangled in desperation. I clamped a pillow over my head and prayed for dawn. The next day, I boarded up the back windows, but it didn't matter. The sound carried through wood and glass alike. I tried sleeping in town a couple nights, but something dragged me back, like a hook in my chest pulling me to that yard. On the fifth night, I gave in. I walked barefoot through the wet grass to the well, heart thundering. The voices rose to meet me, frantic, promising relief if I just pulled them up. My hands gripped the old wooden crank, though there was no bucket, no rope left. It was just instinct, muscle memory that didn't belong to me. I turned it slowly, and with each creak, the voices grew louder, filling the night air like a storm. Then came the weight. Invisible but real, pulling against the crank as though something below had latched on. My arms strained, sweat dripping, breath coming hard. I couldn't stop. I didn't want to stop. I needed to know what was waiting at the end of that line, even if no line existed. The air grew cold, my teeth chattering, the grass slick beneath my feet, and then, just as the weight reached its peak, everything went silent. Not quiet, silent, as though the world itself had been muted. My breath puffed white, hanging in the air. I leaned over the stones, heart hammering, and for the first time, something looked back. A pale face surfaced from the dark, eyes wide and hollow, lips moving without sound, then another, and another, crowding just beneath the lip of the well, mouths open in noiseless pleas. Their eyes locked on mine. My grip slipped. The crank spun free, whipping around so fast it burned my palms. I stumbled backward, and the silence broke into a roar of voices, 100 or more, all shrieking my name. The sound chased me into the house, rattling the walls, slamming doors. I didn't sleep that night, and when the sun came, the silence that followed was worse than the noise. It's been weeks now. I don't go near the well, but I can't leave either. Something binds me here. The voices are patient, but they never stop. Every night they call, every night they beg, and I feel myself weakening. Sometimes I catch myself standing at the back door without remembering how I got there, staring out across the yard with my hand already reaching for the knob. It's only a matter of time before I answer, and when I do, I know I won't be pulling them up. They'll be pulling me down. The first morning I saw the ash fall around the old place in Spur. I thought somebody upwind was burning trash again. I had pulled off Highway 70 for a cup of black coffee that tasted like the inside of a thermos and decided to swing by the property because the county judge had left 2 voicemails, both of them tart with patience running out. The house sat a few blocks off Hill Street, where the blacktop roughens and the mesquite starts shouldering the fences, and it looked like most of the older homes in that part of Dickens County that haven't been loved since the collapse of some family line. The porch had slumped. The glass was a rumor of itself. The paint had gone to dust long ago. It was a smothered thing under the big sky, quiet in the way of a wound that never healed. From the road, the air looked clean, a September blue as flat as enamel. 5 steps onto the lot, my boots began to leave marks in a surface that looked like gray flour, sifted by an invisible hand. It coated the buffalo grass, sat in the low spoon shapes left by last spring's rain, traced the tops of prickly pear pads like frost. When I turned my palm up, I caught a light patter, a delicate tapping as if the sky itself were shaking out a tired rag. No smoke smell, no heat shimmer, no sound of burning beyond the thin whisper that never quite resolves into wind. My job title on paper was Environmental Compliance Technician, which in practice meant I drove distances that would make a long-haul trucker sigh and told men with welders and bulldozers that they needed to fill out a different form. Spur had brought me in because the tiny home crowd had rolled into town with hopes for festivals and lifestyle segments, and people posting videos of an address where ash fell from a clear sky was not part of that plan. I took out a sample jar, the amber plastic kind with a white screw top, and scooped some of the gray drifts at the edge of the sidewalk. Underneath was clay the color of old blood and a flat beer bottle cap with a brand I didn't recognize. I weighed the jar in my hand, feeling the faintest heat that might only have been in my head, and turned toward the house. The front door was closed and penciled with scuffs like careless handwriting. The knob had been replaced sometime in the 70s with a brass number that hung onto the spindle. By resentment alone, I put my ear against the wood and listened because that's what you do in old houses, not because you expect anything. That's when I heard it. Not flame. Not creak. A tiny patter, the same hush as outside but inside the door, as if the air were filled with a dry snow only the house could see. The key was in my pocket, picked up at the county office from a clerk whose expression said she would prefer never to speak of this property again. The tip of the brass found the keyway like it had been waiting for my hand. The latch turned. I pushed. Inside smelled like abandoned churches and attic cedar, a layered age with the soft bite of old soot that had never seen a flame inside my lifetime. The parlor was a rectangle of pale with a fireplace on the north wall that had been sealed with brick sometime after the war, a hairline running through the mortar like a dry river. In the middle of the floor, someone had marked a rough circle with a carpenter's pencil. I stepped inside and the ash thickened around my shoulders like fine rain. I lifted my hand to catch a few flakes and saw them melt onto my skin without damp, like they were falling out of the air already defeated. I took photographs. I sketched a floor plan. I wrote on a clipboard because writing helps me pretend that I am in charge of what happens next. The house had the proportions of 1920s construction and the stubborn bones of someone who built with cotton money and pride. The kitchen door hung straight. The back porch sagged but held. Through the dining room windows you could see the alley, and beyond that a strip of pasture where wind turbines turned like slow thoughts. It was all ordinary until you saw the way the ash made lines on the window glass, not random, but as if the house were collecting it on purpose, tracing out a pattern that was too regular to be made by chance. Lines from sill to lintel, lines from corner to corner, line upon line until the glass wore a faint star of soot in each pane. I slept that night in a rented room above the feed store, listening to trucks climb the grade out of town and the far keening of a train on a line that doesn't run passengers anymore. I dreamed I stood on the porch of the old house at dawn with a broom in my hand, and the air was a gray veil around my face. In the dream, the ash tasted like pennies but did not choke me. It kept falling until I woke and checked the time on my phone and found that the hour before sunrise still had a long way to go. When you work in small towns, you learn to talk early and keep it polite. At the diner, I asked the woman topping off my coffee if she had seen the ash on Maple Street. She looked past me at the window where sunlight made a white rectangle she didn't have to scrub. "It always falls," she said. "Only in the morning. You can call Austin if it makes you feel better. Austin never did do much more than give this place a new word for dust. What do you call it? She looked at me then, and for a second we were on the far side of a joke together. One of those cairns of humor people stacked to mark the spots where they don't want to stop and think. We call it what it is, she said. A reminder. I asked her what it reminded people of, and she said, to be where you promised to be. Then she moved down the counter and asked somebody about eggs. At the library, a woman named Pritchard, with hair the bright white of cotton bolls, showed me the microfilm machine, which whined and trembled like a funny relative at Thanksgiving. The librarians of rural counties know more about their towns than the men who wear badges and win elections. They also know when a stranger is going to ask them for what hurts. I gave her a list of addresses and dates that would make me look like a man interested in building codes, then slid the old house on Maple Street in at the end as if I had just thought of it. September 12th, 1925, she said without looking. You will want what passed for a newspaper then and what we actually used, which is a bulletin posted at the courthouse. We have both. She cranked the machine and the past unscrolled in jerks and light. There it was. House fire on Maple, early morning loss. The words had been written by a man who guessed at facts in a hurry and went to lunch. The first paragraph told me the house had burned very early, sometime near the rooster hour. A mother and 3 children were pulled out. The mother was alive. The children were lost. There followed a list of a dozen men who had responded, and a remark about the pump that stuck when the water crew primed it. In the second column, a short note mentioned that the husband of the household was not present, and that a search had been made of the pasture and the road. Did they ever find him? I asked. Pritchard shook her head and watched my face as if I should have already known. No, she said. And the pump handle later bent. That was a story in itself. What did they say about the ash? She took off her reading glasses and cleaned them on the hem of her cardigan while she thought about how to answer. We didn't say anything about ash then. It started after, not long after. People called it a weather oddity, until the old men found other names for it, and then the women found the proper one. A reminder. There is an idea written in that house that hasn't canceled itself yet. Written by who? Not by the paper, she said, and cut off the machine and stood. Which is how librarians say that's enough for now. On the third morning, I got to the house in full dark and parked under a cottonwood that had seen horses tied to it when horses were the way you came to town. I sat on the porch steps with a backpack and a thermos and the sense that I was waiting for a bus that might never be scheduled to stop. Spur was still. The turbines were black towers with blades you could only see when they cut a star out of the sky. Then the horizon turned from ink to charcoal to slate, and the eastern light came thin through the mesquite fence, and the moment the sun found the porch rail, the ash began. It does not look like a great deal when you are in it. It looks like someone dusting above your head. It does not sting your eyes or leave a soot mustache on your lip. What it does is settle. It settles on your shoulders, on your shoes, in the hollows of the porch boards. And in that settling, it makes a counting that you start to hear without your ears. You hear one day for each flake. You hear years. You hear mornings measured in patient gray that won't leave. I tried science first. I set out 3 clean baking trays with tape across them to mark quadrants. I put one in the yard, one under the kitchen light fixture, and one on the mantel where the fireplace had been bricked. I left them an hour and capped them the way they tell you to in the field guide, so later you can tell yourself you did what you could. I sent them to a contact at a lab north of Abilene, who runs tests for ranchers and frac crews. He called me a few days later and said he could tell me what it wasn't. It wasn't fly ash from a power plant. It wasn't pollen from any plant they knew. It wasn't mineral dust from the Llano Estacado, which has its own signature like handwriting in clay. It looked like wood ash, only more fragile, and there were trace organics that suggested fat had burned somewhere in the recipe. You mean something like kitchen grease, I said, already knowing he didn't. I mean something like a house, he said. Only you say there hasn't been a fire there. Only I know the smell of old stories in a sample bag. Call me if you want me to lie to your boss. I kept going back because I told the judge I would figure it out, and because the ash had already figured me. It had threaded itself into the morning so completely that I measured the rest of my hours by the number of times I looked at the clock to see how far I was from the next daybreak. People in town talked to me about fences and culverts and a new potential ordinance about junk cars. And all the time I was hearing the little hush inside that house, the soft patter, the not sound of what never stops. On a Saturday, I knocked on a door on a different street because Pritchard had given me a name. The man who opened it was long and spare as a door jamb, with a face like a map of the county if you crumpled it and smoothed it once. He told me I could call him Tate because everyone did. He wore his years the way the house wore ash, an even coat he had quit protesting against. You were a boy in 25, I said. I was a boy long before that and long after, which is another way of saying I never grew into anything worth repeating, he said, and let me in. His living room smelled like saddle soap and Sin Eater's candy, something sweet put over something clean. I want to know about the pump, I said. That is the part that sticks in the throat, he said, taking a chair. Old trucks with copper tanks, hose that kinks if you look at it wrong, men in boots that leak. That was our fire department. You had to prime the pump with a good heavy handle, work it till the water climbed. It stuck that morning at Maple Street. Stopped dead like someone's hand had found the gear and held it. Men swore it happened. Men also swear less reliable things, but that morning I was there, and I saw the handle bent after. Not by normal use, bent like somebody angry about a minute they could not have back. Why would someone hold the pump? I asked, and he smiled without humor. Because someone wanted the fire to take more than it should, and that someone believed he loved the person he meant to punish. If you have not seen that kind of love, count that a blessing. If you have, eat well and sleep when you can. Who held it? No one would say. Boys saw a figure run. Boys always see figures run. We ran toward flames then. Now we run toward screens. Maybe it is the same because neither one will admit what it shows you. I asked him about the husband, and he said the husband had been a section hand on the rails and that he had a gambler's hands and a foreman's walk. Sometimes he brought home money that did not come from section work. After the fire, he did not come home at all. If a man leaves under shame, you get the same result as if he left under fear, Tate said. He is gone and you never know which it was. That's why the ash falls. So you will never be done making your guess. I asked him what people do about the ash, and he told me the healthy thing would be to sweep it once and go on. But healthy things aren't the only choices. Some mornings you will see a woman there with a rag for the windows, he said. Some mornings you will see a boy with a stick trying to write his own name in it. Some mornings no one will go and the house will keep its own company. And that is when you should not go. Because the house remembers better when it is alone. That night I sat in my truck outside the house and told myself things I did not believe. I told myself that wind will pile dust oddly. That early light will change the way you see particles in air. That a place with a story will try to keep telling it even when the last person who knows how it ends has stopped talking. Then I got out and went in because you cannot take a paycheck for figuring something out and then stop because your guessing feels too much like praying. I chose the parlor floor because the circle someone had drawn there had not faded. I brought a broom. The ash fell, I swept. It is possible to sweep 100 square feet clean while a slow rain of gray keeps coming. It is possible to keep at it long past when you know you are not winning. Because the act of moving the broom begins to feel like a bargain. Like if you make the floor bare enough, the house will stop and say thank you. It is possible to hear a sound while you are sweeping. Not the hush of falling, not the sigh of your own breath. A soft tapping in the next room as if a finger wanted your attention very much and had not been taught to knock. I followed it into the kitchen. A kettle sat on the stove that had not had a gas line in 50 years. It was wrong the way a coat on the back of a chair is wrong when you know you live alone. The kettle rocked once. The tapping came again, not from the kettle but from the back porch. I opened the screen and the morning smelled like a fair day at the end of summer, when the cotton is almost ready, and the air has that thin bite that says the big sky is about to go blue for weeks. The tapping came again from below me. I looked down to where a low walk had been poured of rough cement. There was a little pocket at the edge where the form had bent and left a half circle like a thumb had pressed it while it set. Inside that pocket were 3 straight nails standing, upright in the ash like the spokes of a compass pointing at the eye. Steps you can tell yourself you are brave until you see nails stand up on their heads for reasons your world cannot afford.
Bravery turns into what you do next.
I crouched and looked closer. The nails were not driven into anything. They were balanced. The ash was calm on their heads and shoulders as if it had decided to hold them steady. That was how I almost missed the other thing. The thing the ash was making like a child tracing letters, lines on the step, lines on the jamb. It wasn't a star. It wasn't a sign I knew. It was a path not quite straight. From the step to the pump that had been removed from the yard long ago and left only a cement pad and 2 bolt circles like eyes gone blind. I walked that line in my mind and I saw a man running it in the dark. I saw him reach the pump. I saw another man hold the handle against him, and the first man put his shoulder into it, and the handle bend like a bone and the hose go slack, and the house catch instead of steam, and the hinge of a morning swing wrong. You can have that picture and still say you saw nothing, but the ash was making the picture for someone. If not for me, then for whoever would come next. I sat a while on the step with that line drawn across my knees and felt my temper come up the way men feel anger when the world asks them to pick up a weight they did not volunteer for. There is a reckless version of courage that has put a lot of names on stones. There is another kind that grows in slow counties that do not allow you to pretend you are the first man to discover a bad thing. I took the broom and I swept the line off the steps, and the nails took themselves down easy, like they were never balanced at all, like I had made them stand in a trick of sight. I went to the pad where the pump had sat and stood there with my feet inside the bolt circles and put my hands out as if a handle lay in them, and the ash fell on my knuckles as light as a breath. I pulled up and down on air until my shoulders burned, and I said to the empty yard that if someone had held the handle all those years ago, he could let go now. I said it out loud, and I said it twice, and the second time I heard a sound behind me like the small exhale a man makes when he moves after he has been still too long. It stopped the next morning. I am not ashamed to tell you that when I saw the bare dirt around the porch and the clean sill with no soft coat, I laughed like a person who hears the click at the end of a long story he was not sure he could finish. The air hung clear. The sun bounced off a truck mirror down the street and put a coin of light on the bricked fireplace that made it look for a second like somebody had set glass into it on purpose. I called the judge and told him his ash problem might be solved. He said he never doubted me and then asked me to write it in an email that could be forwarded. It held for 2 days. On the third morning, the ash fell again, but not on Maple Street. The little gray snow was on my truck when I came down from the room above the feed store. It lay fine along the windshield wipers and inside the cowl where leaves collect. A footprint led away from the driver's door. It was mine, and it wasn't because it was mine from an hour in the future I had not stepped into yet. I wiped the windshield with the side of my hand and watched the sky for what I knew would be there. Nothing. The ash didn't need a sky to come from. It had my name now. It had my mornings. I drove east that day to Dickens, then farther into the open where the land becomes an argument between big and flat, and I kept seeing the sway of a pump handle in the empty air above my knees. The people who live out there can smell weather that a Doppler radar has not decided on. I watched them at gas pumps squint toward a horizon that was clean, then look down at their trucks and brush their fingers across gray on the paint, and frown with the same puzzled sadness people wear at the funerals of men they did not like. If you want to call what came next haunting, you can. If you need a better word, the county does not supply one. I found ash in the fold of a towel in my room when the window had been shut all day. I found it in my boot where my sock made a circle. I found it on a page of a book where I had left a line half read. It did not pile high. It did not make a mess a broom could brag about. It felt like time you did not spend properly. I began to think I could hear it even when I was driving. The light patter that could be rain if I turned the radio on and let it lie to me. People asked me if the house was fixed, and I said it was better. The judge asked me when he could send a letter to the board about it, and I said give it a week. Pritchard told me to come by. She made tea that tasted like you were not allowed to have another cup, and pushed a box across the table. Inside were photographs. The first was dated late September 1925. It showed a woman in front of the house with her hair pinned, her mouth in the shape you make when your lips have memorized the feel of a name and refuse to say it. There were 3 small hats on the porch rail in a line like a math problem no one wanted to solve. The next photo was the house alone. The windows were open. There was no ash. The third was winter. You could see it in the stiff way the trees were holding their shoulders. There was something on the ground like frost, but not where frost should be. Gathered thick on the porch itself, thin in the yard. Someone had written in pencil on the back, "Always in the morning. How did the husband leave?" I asked. "Under a story," she said. There was a rumor he had set the fire for insurance. There was another rumor he had tried to stop it, but someone else kept him from it. There was a third rumor that he went into the house after and saw something that made it impossible to stay in the state of Texas. Rumors are ash. They cling. You wipe them and they are still there. Did anyone ever confess? To the pump, yes, when the man was dying, and no one wrote it down because a woman in the room said a confession is not a receipt. To the fire, no. We do not confess to our machinery. We confess to the uses we put it to. That is harder. What did the dying man say? She looked at me with a calm that felt like standing on the high side of a dam at low water. He said he believed bending the pump would make the man inside hurt the way he himself had been made to hurt. He was wrong by 3 names and right by none. Then he cried for his mother. Most men in this county who ever did anything to be ashamed of finished with that. I drove out to the house at dusk because dawn had become a time I could only meet with the kind of courage that makes mistakes. The sky went the color of a bruise you see the next day when you go to shave. The windows caught the last light and threw it back pale. I went in without using the door, which felt like a kindness. The rooms breathe different in evening. They are resigned. They have put away their lists. I sat on the floor inside the pencil circle and tried to feel whether the house wanted another version from me. People will tell you that buildings do not want. People will tell you a lot of things they have to say to keep their days straight. When it came in the weight of the air. Not colder, not warmer, but heavier. The sense that someone had sat down across from me and put his hands where I could not see them. I said what I had rehearsed driving dirt roads until the mesh of the fence sang to me. I said that everyone present owed a debt and that no one present knew the exact sum, and that maybe the error was in the math itself. I said the pump handle had been a lever placed under a human heart, and that if there was any use in the ash, it might be to warn anyone who saw it against touching anything with the intention of making someone else's pain equal their own. Then I said something I had not planned. I said the ash could follow me if it needed to. I said I was going to leave town and it could come. I said if it needed to fall on my mornings instead, I would understand. You cannot make a bargain with a house. You can say you will sweep it, and that is still a man with a broom promising himself a win he cannot have. But there are places where grief is a weather pattern and you are a small town under it. I left Spur a week later with the email written and the letter sent, and a feeling in my bones like the hum of a transformer you cannot see. I watched the turbines in my side mirror for as long as I could, and then the road did that West Texas thing where it unspools forever, and then is suddenly nothing but a line on a flat map. The ash came with me. It came to a motel near Throckmorton, where the bathroom tile wore a gray sugar on the morning of checkout. It came to a rest area off 277 where I sat on a metal table and drank coffee that had forgotten how to be hot. It came to my apartment 200 miles away when I turned the key, and something light shifted on the kitchen counter like a sigh I had left behind. That night I stood by the sink and said aloud what nobody wants to, which is that I might have volunteered for this. The ash did not answer because answers belong to the living, and this was a weather that belongs to a moment nobody let be over. I still write reports. I still go where the county line is a suggestion, and the sky is a sheet big enough to wrap the dead. Some mornings are clear. Some mornings the air has that bright nothing to it that says the world has agreed to start again. More mornings than not, I wipe a little soft gray from the sill, from the hood of my truck, from the face of my wristwatch where it has settled into the tiny spaces around the glass. When I see it, I think of that pencil circle on a parlor floor and the line traced to the pump that was not there. I think of a handle held against a man by another man who believed pain could pay a bill. I think how often I have wanted the same arithmetic. I think of Spur at dawn and the house that hasn't burned in 100 years dropping its reminder on the ground as faithfully as prayer. If you drive through that town on one of those mornings when the turbines are turning and the cafe opens before the first good light, you might see a man out front of the old place with a broom. He will be doing nothing and everything, moving gray into neat dustpans and setting the pans by the porch and then carrying them to the alley, where he will empty them into a clean plastic bag that won't hold anything you can weigh. He won't look at you because looking at you would mean he is a man doing a thing that makes sense. He will keep sweeping. The ash will keep falling. The house will keep its 100-year promise to be a place where something stops only long enough to tell you it hasn't. I don't go back often, but when I do, I bring a rag for the windows, and I trace away the faint star the ash makes on the glass. And if I catch my face there for a second, it looks like any other man's face in Texas in late light, honest and tired and not done wanting. The rag goes dark. The glass goes clean. The morning after is gray again. The turbines turn. The wind has 100 names for grief, and the quietest one is the one that falls fine as dust on the places where we meant to be better and waited too long to try. I first heard about the house at the edge of the old Denton Carnival grounds from a man who smelled like sawdust and cheap whiskey. It was August and the air clung to my skin like wet cloth. I had come back to Denton with a suitcase and a job taking photographs of distressed properties for a bank nobody would put their name on. Houses that had been left behind always interested me. Even as a kid, I liked the silence of places where people had stopped living. Empty spaces made sense where people never did. After the divorce and a short stretch of sleeping in my car off Loop 288, the bank work paid just enough for a room over a shop off the square and coffee from a place that stayed open late for students. The sawdust man was a contractor named Reese, who was bidding on tearing down an old concession building out by North Lakes, where the carnival used to set up before the city had opinions. He told me about the house that nobody claimed and nobody wanted to claim. He said it stayed out there like a stubborn tooth in a mouth gone rotten, the last structure standing on a field that felt wrong to stand on. He said at night the windows turned and turned, and if you stared too long, you felt your stomach tilt like you were on a ride you hadn't meant to board. I laughed because people tell stories in Denton the way they tune guitars, for the sound of it to see who turns their head. Still, I drove out there after sunset a few days later, when the heat had finally given up and the cicadas had started up their endless electricity. I took Bonnie Bray past the soccer fields, then cut along a dirt track beaten down by maintenance trucks and teenagers with warm beer. The ground opened into a flat of crabgrass and mesquite where rusted tent stakes pushed up like old bones. I found the house near a stand of pecan trees worn smooth by wind. It wasn't much, just a one-story rectangle with a Texas limestone facade and a roof that had sagged into a frown, all of it settled onto concrete blocks that leaned like men in prayer. There was the ghost of a front porch, more suggestion than structure. It deserved nothing more and asked for even less. I parked and sat with the engine ticking. The sky over Denton holds heat and sound in a bowl. I could hear distant traffic on I-35 and late trains moaning through town like something trying to find its name. I felt the old pull of home and the newer pull of money. Pictures. That was what I had come for. I took the Nikon and crossed the field. Goatheads found the soft spots in my shoes. The house had 4 windows across the front, 4 across the back, with 2 on each side. All identical, tall and narrow. The kind you see in old farmhouses that relied on cross breezes and luck. The glass looked clean, which surprised me. Nobody had lived here since the carnival packed up for good, yet the panes shone like they remembered what they were for. I lifted the camera and caught myself before I pressed the shutter. There was a tilt to the light in those panes, not a reflection of the pecan trees or the flat orange of the western sky. The windows rolled, the way a Ferris wheel turns slow enough to convince you that nothing is happening until your feet leave the ground. It was a trick of the eye, I told myself. I've got a decent catalog of tricks I pull out to explain away other people's experiences. I stepped closer until the limestone scraped my shirt. The glass was cool. I put my palm against it and felt a hum that might have been the blood in my hand. The interior of the house showed in the pane, but not steady. The room on the other side slid past like scenes on a carousel. A cracked sofa with floral cushions drifted out of frame and a bare room with nail holes drifted in. A coat rack appeared, a hat slung low as if hiding its eyes, then gone. A kitchen I hadn't seen from the outside forwarded itself across the glass. It was subtle. Such a small rotation you could deny it if denial was important to you. I stood there trying to decide what I believed and who it mattered to, and the window brought something else into view. A little boy in a striped shirt stood at the far wall. He had a hand pressed against the opposite pane. He mimicked me. He looked up with a serious little face I recognized and didn't recognize, because every child looks like every other child until you love them or lose them. His eyes cut to the side like someone had called his name. Then the view turned and he was gone. The coat rack drifted back in. The sofa again. I stepped away and swallowed dry. I felt my shoulders bunch like the way a man stands at the very edge of a pool and tells himself to jump. The bank didn't need night pictures, so I filed the shots of the exterior during the day. The honest canted angles, the poor roofline, the weeds behaving like they'd paid the note. But the house stayed with me the way certain songs stick and you hum them without permission. I went back the next night and the next. There were tracks of others, cigarette butts pressed into bottle caps, a pile of wax where someone had burned a candle all the way down. It wasn't a popular place, but it wasn't unknown. It felt like a place the town had agreed not to argue about. On the 4th night, I took a chair out there and a thermos of coffee. There was a sickle moon and a wind that smelled like lake water and hot metal. The windows turned from the first minute I settled the chair and set my boots, but they turned lazy. Like the ride was underpowered or tired. The view inside pulled past with a rhythm that caught my breathing. The pane offered a child's room, then a hallway with a runner of floral carpet. The kitchen again. Every scene rotated like a car on a wheel, and every time I awaited the little boy as if the pane were a slide carousel, and I was the one clicking forward. Someone came up behind me without any sound I could call footsteps, and I startled to my feet hard enough to knock the chair backward. The man who had approached wore a denim jacket and had a face that had been cut by years into lines you could play like strings. I knew him before I placed him. Reese, the sawdust man. He nodded at the house the way a man nods at a man he doesn't trust but has to deal with. "Thought you might come out here," he said. He kept his voice quiet without whispering, as if the house had ears and he didn't care to offend them. "They called me to bid this place. Then they told me I could have it if I wanted it, no bid, just haul it away. No permits, no inspections, a gift." That's the word the woman used on the phone. A gift. I told her I don't take gifts that need a crane. "You believe the stories," I said, keeping him in my peripheral and the glass in front of me. The pane had turned to the hallway again. Shadows lay along the runner like someone had left things there you could trip on. "I believe in gravity," he said. "I believe in momentum. When something starts turning, it keeps turning unless you put a stop to it. The carnival out here went bad long before it left. You had a wheel that shouldn't have been run in wind and an operator who was 2 drinks past making good choices. You had a man with a voice that made you ignore the sound of bolts complaining. Then one summer night, everything that could loosen did. The wheel didn't come apart. It just wouldn't stop. Started slow, then took on a mind. Lights burned out in streaks. People got sick. A woman with her child begged to be let down, and the operator kept saying, 1 more revolution, 1 more, and then we'll stop." A man jumped and broke both legs trying to get free. "You know how rumors go, so I'll cut them out and give you what I know." The house wasn't here then. It was brought after. Built with windows the operator bought cheap when the carnival went belly up. He said he loved the light in them because each pane had seen so many faces. He said they would keep company, and a man in the country needs that. His voice trailed and the wind picked up. The pane rolled a room past that I hadn't seen and made my throat close. A clutter of crates and posters leaned against a wall, bold letters spelling rides and prices and promises. A Ferris wheel flyer printed in cheerful blues spun into view and then spun on. A long-legged woman holding cotton candy, the wheel behind her drawn with perfect circles. The scene shifted and I saw the little boy again, near the corner of a bed that looked like a pallet on the floor. He didn't look at me this time. He tilted his head as if listening to the house. His lips moved. Whatever he said hovered on the glass, then gone. Reese stepped close enough our shoulders almost touched. He was looking at the glass the way men look at weather at the edge of a field they can't leave and can't tend. "They found the operator's body years later," he said, "and by then it didn't matter. Not to anyone who wasn't already caught. They say he was still talking. They say his jaw had to be wired shut to hold it in place and it didn't change anything. My dad worked the grounds and told me you could hear calliope music in your teeth when you lay down to sleep. When you got up, your legs hurt like you'd been walking in circles." I said the only thing that seemed sane in the moment. "Why do the windows turn?" It came out flat, a statement hung like a question because I needed something to hold. He didn't smile. "Because the ride doesn't know it's over. Because the operator loved it more than anything else he ever had. Because a wheel is a prayer to keep going. Pick the one that lets you sleep. It's the same answer." He left as quietly as he had arrived, his boots making a soft ticking in the dry grass that the wind erased. The thermos coffee had the taste of pennies. I stayed until the sky was a blacker black and the traffic on the highway became a rush like river water. The windows kept turning and I kept watching because sometimes familiarity feels like safety, even when it isn't. I saw the little boy a 3rd time that night. He pressed his hand to the glass on his side and lifted his fingers, touching them to the pane one by one. I mirrored him without thinking. Index finger to index finger, ring finger to ring finger, like a game I had played with my son when he was small. The thought hit me like cold water. That was why the boy's serious face meant something to me. He had my son's way of looking to the side when he listened. I shook it off because my son lived with his mother in San Antonio and was very much a boy who rode bikes and scraped knees and slept under a baseball comforter. I told myself that the glass was a trick and that it was playing and that I was the audience it had been waiting on. I started going every night. I told myself it was to get the right photo for the bank, or to catch kids trespassing, or to make sure there wasn't a squatter who'd set a fire. I told myself a handful of things I didn't believe. Each night the pains turned. Some nights faster, some nights slow enough to feel like nothing would ever happen again. I brought a notebook and started writing down the sequence of the rooms as they rotated, and they never held still long enough for me to make a diagram that matched from one page to the next. It should have frustrated me. Instead, it felt like being included in a conversation that had been going on forever at a table you had always wanted to sit at. On a Friday, I brought an old Midway prize I had saved from a summer that smelled like diesel and sugar. A yellow bear with one ear. I set it on the sill and left it. When I came back Saturday night, the bear was on the other side of the glass, turned and tucked into the corner of what looked like a den. 4 nights later, and I don't know how to say this without making it sound like I'm making a fool of myself, the little boy had the bear in his arms. He held it like a talisman. He sat on the floor with his back to the wall, and the pain slid past, and I felt myself lean toward it, as if the house had rocked and I had to balance. I stopped bringing the camera. The lens felt dishonest. It put something between me and what I had become part of. I brought a folding chair with a better seat back and a headlamp for the walk from the car. I brought mosquito spray and once a half pint of rye that I touched twice and didn't touch again. I brought my heart and left it there, a little more every night. Like you leave cash on the counter of a place you visit too often, because you want them to remember you when you don't show. One night a woman in a Ford drove up and parked near me, and left the headlights on. She got out but didn't come close. She hugged herself and looked like someone who had lost something small that meant more than something large. She asked me if I had seen a girl with hair to her waist and a nose ring. I said no because I hadn't, and because the truth inside the truth would have ruined her. She didn't ask about the windows, and I didn't tell her not to look. She got back in and sat with the headlights making a wash of white across the front of the house. You would think that would have made the panes less bright. It didn't. The turn was its own light. When she drove away, I stayed until the moon had crossed half the sky and the windows slowed. The little boy stood again, as if he had waited for the room to come around to where I was. He pointed at something behind me. I turned without thinking and saw darkness and pecan trees in the way of my car. Nothing more. When I looked back at the glass, the boy was closer. He tapped the pane. He lifted the bear and pressed it to the glass, and in the moment before the scene moved on, I saw the stitches along the bear's ear that my ex-wife had sewn in our kitchen one winter, when the heat had a mind to die. The thread color was wrong. She had used blue because that was what she had found, and my son had laughed at the way the bear looked like it wore an earring. I could not breathe for a count I will not tell you, because it makes my ribs hurt to remember it. After that, the pull was not abstract. I stopped going to the coffee place on the square, because the house started visiting me in the glass of the pastry case. I crossed Fry Street without looking, because every plate glass offered a curved suggestion of cabins rotating past. I went to Old Alton Bridge at dusk as if the river could thin me out, and I stood there while the water talked about old tragedies and goats. I washed my hands in the bathroom of the gas station at University, and Carol in the mirror tried to tell me about a hallway, and I looked down at the sink and counted the seconds until my heart fell back into a rhythm I recognized. All of it led me back out behind North Lakes, because if something calls you long enough, you either answer or you run, and I had nowhere left to run. The last night I brought nothing. No chair, no notebook, no coffee. Just a man in dusty boots and a shirt one day away from needing washing. I walked across the field with the moon low and orange as if it had taken on the dirt of the county. I stood close enough to the front window to smell the limestone. The pane turned and I waited until the little boy wandered into view, because it had become like that. Like you arrive at a bar at a certain hour because that's when your friend shows up, and if he isn't there, you worry. He looked older than the first night I saw him, or I looked older. He had blue stitches on his bear's ear and a cowlick that favored the left. He lifted his hand and I lifted mine. He put his palm to the glass and I did the same. The pain was cold and then not. It gave under my hand the way a pond gives in winter when it wants to hold you and cannot. The pull wasn't violent. It was polite, which made it more dangerous. It didn't drag me. It invited me to adjust my weight, and I obliged. My palm sank. There was a pressure that was not pain and not pleasure. It reminded me of those long summer rides in the back seat when my father drove us across Texas and the road came up to meet the car, the tires humming a song that put a boy to sleep. I leaned in because leaning felt like an answer. I leaned in because the room on the other side had the texture of memory and the temperature of a Sunday afternoon. If you've never leaned into a window, you might not understand. If you have, there is nothing I can tell you to stop you. I think I would have gone all at once if not for a sound behind me. Not a voice. The low creak of a ride starting up. It ran across my skin like someone had opened a drawer of knives. The creak was followed by a click and a whir and a soft human cheer that could have been one person or a dozen, and it was worse because it was so happy. I pulled back and my hand came away wet. The pain had left a perfect print of my palm on the outside, like the house had exhaled me in that instant and then changed its mind. I did not move again. I watched. The pain turned a room past that was no room I had seen in a house. It was a car on a wheel, all curved glass and metal ribs and a bench seat with cracked red vinyl. Lights blinked behind it like someone had hung a string of stars and forgotten to turn them off. The car swayed. The boy climbed in and sat as if he had been waiting on his number. He settled his bear on his lap and looked out. He did not see me, and that was worse than if he had. The car swung and the view passed and the next car came, and an old woman I recognized from 100 grocery store lines sat with her pocketbook in her lap, looking like she had forgotten her list. Turn in another car, a teenager, black nail polish flaking from thumbs. Eyes closed in that way that means don't make me open them. Turn in a missus whose last name I don't have. Hair pinned tight, eyes pinwheeling with the reflection of lights. Turn in a man I had seen sleeping on a bench off Hickory, head tilted, mouth open. I stepped back without meaning to. The wheel in the window moved and I could feel its weight. The glass turned scenes that were not rooms and it became too obvious to deny that the ride was running inside that house. It had never stopped. The operator's voice reached me the way voices do when you hear them through a door. A patter, a rhythm, a promise that the next revolution would bring you back to where you began, which is the only promise anybody ever believes. I closed my eyes because looking felt like kneeling, and I did not want to kneel to a house. The sound of the creak and click stayed in my ears as I drove. I went to my room over the shop and packed quietly. I took the photos off my walls and laid them face down. I sat on the mattress and called my son. He was excited about a field trip to a museum no child has ever truly loved, and told me about a painting he had seen of a man staring at a bowl of fruit like the fruit owed him money. We laughed. I told him I loved him twice because once didn't hold me. When I hung up, I went to the mirror over the sink to splash my face and I stopped cold. In the mirror for half a heartbeat and maybe less, not a room nor a man nor a recognizable piece of furniture turned. Only light. A spinning circle of it, rimmed with tiny bulbs the color of old lemons. It caught me like it always had, and for the first time I understood it would not stop because I had asked. A wheel has no notion of your life. I didn't go back the next night. I didn't go back the night after. This is not one of those stories where I tell you I broke the spell by not feeding it. The truth is that the house doesn't need me, and that is scarier than the idea that it wants me. The last house on the field sits with its limestone face and its windows turning at hours that do not belong to clocks. People go missing in the way people always do in places that give them permission. A waitress at the diner by the highway says she sees a car park sometimes, and 2 people get out and 1 gets back in. A cop I knew in high school tells me he gets calls about lights moving, where there shouldn't be lights, and then silence when he arrives. Reese left Denton for a job in Bowie, or he told me that, and maybe the man in the denim jacket I knew is in a car that creaks on the lift and swings past the view every few breaths. I do not stand there to check. When the wind is right, you can hear the music. It's not a song I know, and it's not the noise of old metal. It isn't nostalgic. Nostalgia is a lie we tell to make circles feel like progress. The music behind those turning panes feels like what it must be like to be a bulb at the edge of a ride. Lit until you burn out, replaced without ceremony, part of a circle that takes and takes because that is what circles do. At night, that field becomes a mouth. The house is a tooth in it, and the windows are the tongue that pulls you in. If you live in Denton and you find yourself near the old grounds, go home. If you find yourself standing under pecans with the dust on your boots and the heat in your throat, turn around. You will not want to. The turn is the point. It is soft. It will not scare you, and that is how it gets you. When I close my eyes, I see the boy and the bear and the blue stitches. I see the car swing in and out of view. and I feel the lift in my stomach that comes right before you get to the top. There's a breath there, a lightness. People mistake it for joy. They throw their heads back and laugh. Sometimes they keep laughing on the way down. Sometimes the laughing never stops because the ride never does. In my better hours, I think the boy is not my son and the window was not a promise. In my worse hours, I go to the sink and the mirror and turn off the lights and wait in the dark to see if the bulbs will begin to pop on one by one in a circle. When nothing happens, I'm relieved and I'm disappointed and I hate myself for both. Somewhere past the soccer fields, the house turns its windows slow and patient, and I imagine all the faces swinging past inside. No screams, just the steady compromise of people who made a choice and then stood by it. Because standing by it is easier than admitting you didn't understand the ride when you climbed in. There are places you can put your hand and feel the world moving under it. People think that means they have control. Denton is full of places like that. The square at 2 a.m, the train tracks running nowhere in particular, the trail that cuts through the park where the sun drops behind the cottonwoods and makes you feel like it waited on you. The house at the carnival grounds is the truest of them. The only rule it holds is that it keeps going. That is the nature of wheels and towns and men. I don't warn anyone anymore because warning turns into advertising. And stories in Denton are just invitations, spoken differently. I walk with my head down when the wind carries that thin music and I count my steps. I do not look in plate glass, not even the clean panes at the barber. My son runs in the sprinkler in a yard I do not visit enough. And when I close my eyes at night, I see the curve of a gondola and the glimmer of a row of bulbs. And I know that if I make the mistake of going again, I will raise my hand in greeting and the glass will accept it. Steady and kind, and I will not come back out until I have swung past your window and you have made the same mistake I did. That is how you keep a ride running. You don't fix the gears. You pull in the people,